Second, departure. Second, configuration. Self-organization elaborates in complexity as the system advances toward the chaotic edge. Ian Malcolm. Clues. Thorne unlocked the door to Levine's apartment and flicked on the lights. They stared, astonished. Arby said, "It looks like a museum." Levine's two-bedroom apartment was decorated in a vaguely Asian style, with rich wooden cabinets and expensive antiques. But the apartment was spotlessly clean, and most of the antiques were housed in plastic cases. Everything was neatly labeled. They walked slowly into the room. "Does he live here?" Kelly said. She found it hard to believe. The apartment seemed so impersonal to her, almost inhuman. And her own apartment was such a mess all the time. "Yeah, he does," Thorne said, pocketing the key. "It always looks like this. It's why he can never live with a woman. He can't stand to have anybody touch anything." The living room couches were arranged around a glass coffee table. On the table were 4 piles of books, each neatly aligned with the glass edge. Arby glanced at the titles. Catastrophe Theory and Emergent Structures, Inductive Processes in Molecular Evolution, Cellular Automata, Methodology of Nonlinear Adaptation, Phase Transition in Evolutionary Systems. There were also some older books with titles in German. Kelly sniffed the air. "Something cooking?" "I don't know," Thorne said. He went into the dining room. Along the wall he saw a hot plate with a row of covered dishes. They saw a polished wood dining table with a place set for one, silver and cut glass. Soup steamed from a bowl. Thorne walked over and picked up a sheet of paper on the table and read, "Lobster bisque, baby organic greens, seared ahi tuna." A yellow post-it was attached. "Hope your trip was good, Romelia." "Wow," Kelly said. "You mean somebody makes dinner for him every day?" "I guess," Thorne said. He didn't seem impressed. He shuffled through a stack of unopened mail that had been set out beside the plate. Kelly turned to some faxes on a nearby table. The first one was from the Peabody Museum at Yale in New Haven. "Is this German?" she said, handing it to Thorne. "Dear Dr. Levine, your requested document Geschichtliche Forschungsarbeiten über die Geologie Zentralamerikas 1922 to 1929 has been sent by Federal Express today. Thank you. Signed, Dina Scrumbus, archivist." "I can't read it," Thorne said, "but I think it's something researches on the geology of Central America. And it's from the 20s, not exactly hot news." "I wonder why he wanted it," she said. Thorne didn't answer her. He went into the bedroom. The bedroom had a spare, minimal look. The bed a black futon, neatly made. Thorne opened the closet doors and saw racks of clothing, everything pressed, neatly spaced, much of it in plastic. He opened the top dresser drawer and saw socks folded, arranged by color. "I don't know how he can live like this," Kelly said. "Nothing to it," Thorne said. "All you need is servants." He opened the other drawers quickly, one after another. Kelly wandered over to the bedside table. There were several books there. The one on top was very small and yellowing with age. It was in German. The title was Die 5 Todesarten. She flipped through it, saw colored pictures of what looked like Aztecs in colorful costumes. It was almost like an illustrated children's book, she thought. Underneath were books and journal articles with the dark red cover of the Santa Fe Institute. Genetic Algorithms and Heuristic Networks, Geology of Central America, Tessellation Automata of Arbitrary Dimension. The 1989 annual report of the InGen Corporation. And next to the telephone she noticed a sheet of hastily scribbled notes. She recognized the precise handwriting as Levine's. It said, Site B, Volcanische, Tacaño, Nublar, 1 of 5 deaths, In mountains? No. Maybe Gutierrez. Careful. Kelly said, "What's Site B? He has notes about it." Thorne came over to look. "Volcanische," he said. "That means volcanic, I think. And Tacaño and Nublar, they sound like place names. If they are, we can check that on an atlas." "And what's this about 1 of 5 deaths?" Kelly said. "Damned if I know," he said. They were staring at the paper when Arby walked into the bedroom and said, "What's Site B?" Thorne looked up. "Why?" "You better see his office," Arby said. Levine had turned the second bedroom into an office. It was like the rest of the apartment, admirably neat. There was a desk with papers laid out in tidy stacks alongside a computer covered in plastic. But behind the desk there was a large corkboard that covered most of the wall, and on this board Levine had tacked up maps, charts, newspaper clippings, Landsat images, and aerial photographs. At the top of the board was a large sign that said, "Site B?" Alongside that was a blurred, curling snapshot of a bespectacled Chinese man in a white lab coat standing in the jungle beside a wooden sign that said, "Site B." His coat was unbuttoned, and he was wearing a T-shirt with lettering on it. Alongside the photo was a large blow-up of the T-shirt, as seen in the original photograph. It was hard to read the lettering, which was partly covered on both sides by the lab coat, but the shirt seemed to say, "Ngen Site B, Research Facility." In neat handwriting, Levine had noted, "Ngen Site B Research Facility? Where?" Just below that was a page cut from the InGen annual report. A circled paragraph read, "In addition to its headquarters in Palo Alto, where InGen maintains an ultra-modern 200,000-square-foot research laboratory, the company runs 3 field laboratories around the world. A geological lab in South Africa, where amber and other biological specimens are acquired, a research farm in the mountains of Costa Rica, where exotic varieties of plants are grown, and a facility on the island of Isla Nublar, 120 miles west of Costa Rica." Next to that, Levine had written, "No B. Liars." Arby said, "He's really obsessed with Site B." "I'll say," Thorne said, "and he thinks it's on an island somewhere." Peering closely at the board, Thorne looked at the satellite images. He noticed that although they were printed in false colors at various degrees of magnification, they all seemed to show the same general geographical area, a rocky coastline and some islands offshore. The coastline had a beach and encroaching jungle. It might be Costa Rica, but it was impossible to say for sure. In truth, it could be any of a dozen places in the world. "He said he was on an island," Kelly said. "Yes," Thorne shrugged, "but that doesn't help us much." He stared at the board. "There must be 20 islands here, maybe more." Thorne looked at a memo near the bottom. "Site B, to all departments of Minder of Press Avoidin after marketing, long-term marketing plan, marketing of proposed resort facilities requires that full complexity of JP technology not be announced. Mr. Hammond wishes to remind all departments that production facility will not be subject of any press release at any time. Production manufacturing facility cannot reference to production island Isla S in-house reference only, strict press guidelines." "This is weird," he said. "What do you make of this?" Arby came over and looked at it thoughtfully. "All these missing letters and garbage," Thorne said. "Does it make any sense to you?" "Yes," Arby said. He snapped his fingers and went directly to Levine's desk. There he pulled the plastic cover off the computer and said, "I thought so." The computer on Levine's desk was not the modern machine that Thorne would have expected. This computer was several years old, large and bulky, its cover scratched in many places. It had a black stripe on the box that said Design Associates Incorporated. And lower down, right by the power switch, a shiny little metal tag that said Property International Genetics Technology Incorporated, Palo Alto, California. "What's this?" Thorne said. "Levine has an InGen computer?" "Yes," Arby said. "He sent us to buy it last week. They were selling off computer equipment." "And he sent you?" Thorne said. "Yeah, me and Kelly. He didn't want to go himself. He's afraid of being followed." "But this thing's a CAD-CAM machine, and it must be 5 years old," Thorne said. CAD-CAM computers were used by architects, graphic artists, and mechanical engineers. "Why would Levine want it?" "He never told us," Arby said, flipping on the power switch. "But I know now." "Yes?" "That memo," Arby said, nodding to the wall. "You know why it looks that way? It's a recovered computer file. Levine's been recovering InGen files from this machine." As Arby explained it, all the computers that InGen sold that day had had their hard drives reformatted to destroy any sensitive data on the disks. But the CAD-CAM machines were an exception. These machines all had special software installed by the manufacturer. The software was keyed to individual machines using individual code references. That made these computers awkward to reformat because the software would have to be reinstalled individually, taking hours. "So they didn't do it," Thorne said. "Right," Arby said. "They just erased the directory and sold them." "And that means the original files are still on the disk." "Right." The monitor glowed. The screen said, "Total recovered files, 2,387. "Jeez," Arby said. He leaned forward, staring intently, fingers poised over the keys. He pushed the directory button, and row after row of file names scrolled down. Thousands of files in all. Thorne said, "How are you going to—" "Give me a minute here," Arby said, interrupting him. Then he began to type rapidly. "Okay, Arb," Thorne said. He was amused by the imperious way Arby behaved whenever he was working with a computer. He seemed to forget how young he was. His usual diffidence and timidity vanished. The electronic world was really his element, and he knew he was good at it. Thorne said, "Any help you can give us will be—" "Doc," Arby said, "come on. Go and, help Kelly or something." And he turned away and typed. Raptor. The velociraptor was 6 feet tall and dark green. Poised to attack, it hissed loudly, its muscular neck thrust forward, jaws wide. Tim, one of the modelers, said, "What do you think, Dr. Malcolm?" "No menace," Malcolm said, walking by. He was in the back wing of the biology department on his way to his office. "No menace?" Tim said. "They never stand like this, flat-footed on 2 feet. Give him a book." He grabbed a notebook from a desk and placed it in the forearms of the animal. "And he might be singing a Christmas carol." "Gee," Tim said. "I didn't think it was that bad." "Bad?" Malcolm said. "This is an insult to a great predator. We should feel his speed and menace and power. Widen the jaws, get the neck down, tense the muscles, tighten the skin, and get that leg up. Remember, raptors don't attack with their jaws, they use their toe claws," Malcolm said. "I want to see the claw raised up, ready to slash down and tear the guts out of its prey." "You really think so?" Tim said doubtfully. "It might scare little kids." "You mean it might scare you?" Malcolm continued down the hallway. "And another thing, change that hissing sound. It sounds like somebody taking a pee. Give this animal a snarl. Give a great predator his due." "Gee," Tim said. "I didn't know you had such personal feelings about it." "It should be accurate," Malcolm said. "You know, there is such a thing as accurate and inaccurate. irrespective of whatever your feelings are." He walked on, irritable, ignoring the momentary pain in his leg. The modeler annoyed him, although he had to admit Tim was just a representative of the current fuzzy-minded thinking, what Malcolm called sappy science. Malcolm had long been impatient with the arrogance of his scientific colleagues. They maintained that arrogance, he knew, by resolutely ignoring the history of science as a way of thought. Scientists pretended that history didn't matter, because the errors of the past were now corrected by modern discoveries. But of course their forebears had believed exactly the same thing in the past, too. They had been wrong then, and modern scientists were wrong now. No episode of science history proved it better than the way dinosaurs had been portrayed over the decades. It was sobering to realize that the most accurate perception of dinosaurs had also been the first. Back in the 1840s, when Richard Owen first described giant bones in England, he named them Dinosauria, terrible lizards. That was still the most accurate description of these creatures, Malcolm thought. They were indeed like lizards, and they were terrible. But since Owen, the scientific view of dinosaurs had undergone many changes. Because the Victorians believed in the inevitability of progress, they insisted that the dinosaurs must necessarily be inferior. Why else would they be extinct? So the Victorians made them fat, lethargic, and dumb, big dopes from the past. This perception was elaborated so that by the early 20th century, dinosaurs had become so weak that they could not support their own weight. Apatosaurs had to stand belly-deep in water or they would crush their own legs. The whole conception of the ancient world was suffused with these ideas of weak, stupid, slow animals. That view didn't change until the 1960s, when a few renegade scientists, led by John Ostrom, began to imagine quick, agile, hot-blooded dinosaurs. Because these scientists had the temerity to question dogma, they were brutally criticized for years, even though it now seemed their ideas were correct. But in the last decade, a growing interest in social behavior had led to still another view. Dinosaurs were now seen as caring creatures, living in groups, raising their little babies. They were good animals, even cute animals. The big sweeties had nothing to do with their terrible fate, which was visited on them by Alvarez's meteor. And that new sappy view produced people like Tim, who were reluctant to look at the other side of the coin, the other face of life. Of course, some dinosaurs had been social and cooperative, but others had been hunters and killers of unparalleled viciousness. For Malcolm, the truest picture of life in the past incorporated the interplay of all aspects of life, the good and the bad, the strong and the weak. It was no good pretending anything else. Scaring little kids, indeed. Malcolm snorted irritably as he walked down the hall. In truth, Malcolm was bothered by what Elizabeth Gelman had told him about the tissue fragment, and especially the tag. That tag meant trouble, Malcolm was sure of it. But he wasn't sure what to do about it. He turned the corner, past the display of Clovis points, arrowheads made by early man in America. Up ahead he saw his office. Beverly, his assistant, was standing behind her desk, tidying papers, getting ready to go home. She handed him his faxes and said, "I've left word for Dr. Levine at his office, but he hasn't called back. They don't seem to know where he is." "For a change," Malcolm said, sighing. It was so difficult working with Levine. He was so erratic. You never knew what to expect. Malcolm had been the one to post bail when Levine was arrested in his Ferrari. He riffled through the faxes, conference dates, requests for reprints. Nothing interesting. "Okay, thanks, Beverly. Oh, and the photographers came. They finished about an hour ago." "What photographers?" he said. "From Chaos Quarterly? To photograph your office." "What are you talking about?" Malcolm said. "They came to photograph your office," she said, "for a series about workplaces of famous mathematicians. They had a letter from you saying it was—" "I never sent any letter," Malcolm said, "and I've never heard of Chaos Quarterly." He went into his office and looked around. Beverly hurried in after him, her face worried. "Is it okay? Is everything here?" "Yes," he said, scanning quickly. "It seems to be fine." He was opening the drawers to his desk, one after another. Nothing appeared to be missing. "That's a relief," Beverly said, "because—" He turned and looked at the far side of the room. The map. Malcolm had a large map of the world with pins stuck in it for all the sightings of what Levine kept calling aberrant forms. By the most liberal count, Levine's count, there had now been 12 in all, from Rangiroa in the west to Baja California and Ecuador in the east. Few of them were verified. But now there was a tissue sample that confirmed one specimen, and that made all the rest more likely. "Did they photograph this map?" "Yes, they photographed everything. Does it matter?" Malcolm looked at the map, trying to see it with fresh eyes, to see what an outsider would make of it. He and Levine had spent hours in front of this map, considering the possibility of a lost world, trying to decide where it might be. They had narrowed it down to 5 islands in a chain off the coast of Costa Rica. Levine was convinced that it was one of those islands, and Malcolm was beginning to think he was right. But those islands weren't highlighted on the map. Beverly said, "They were a very nice group, very polite. Foreign Swiss, I think." Malcolm nodded and sighed. The hell with it, he thought. It was bound to get out sooner or later. "It's all right, Beverly." "Are you sure?" "Yes, it's fine. Have a good evening." "Good night, Dr. Malcolm." Alone in his office, he dialed Levine. The phone rang, and then the answering machine beeped. Levine was still not home. "Richard, are you there? If you are, pick up. It's important." He waited. Nothing happened. "Richard, it's Ian. Listen, we have a problem. The map is no longer secure. And I've had that sample analyzed, Richard, and I think it tells us the location of Site B if my—" There was a click as the phone lifted. He heard the sound of breathing. "Richard?" he said. "No," said the voice. "This is Thorne, and I think you better get over here right away." The 5 deaths. "I knew it," Malcolm said, coming into Levine's apartment and glancing quickly around. "I knew he would do something like this. You know how impetuous he is. I said to him, 'Don't go until we have all the information.' But I should have known. Of course he went." "Yes, he did." "Ego," Malcolm said, shaking his head. "Richard has to be first, has to figure it out first, has to get there first. I'm very concerned. He could ruin everything. This impulsive behavior, you realize it's a storm in the brain, neurons on the edge of chaos. Obsession is just a variety of addiction. But what scientists ever had? Self-control. They instruct them in school. It's bad form to be balanced. They forget Niels Bohr was not only a great physicist, but an Olympic athlete. These days they all try to be nerds. It's the professional style." Thorne looked at Malcolm thoughtfully. He thought he detected a competitive edge. He said, "Do you know which island he went to?" "No, I do not." Malcolm was stalking around the apartment, taking things in. "The last time we talked, we had narrowed it down to 5 islands, all in the south, but we hadn't decided which one." Thorne pointed to the wall board, the satellite images. "These islands here?" "Yes," Malcolm said, looking briefly. "They're strung out in an arc, all about 10 miles offshore from the Bay of Puerto Cortes. Supposedly they're all uninhabited. Local people call them the 5 Deaths." "Why?" Kelly said. "Some old Indian story," Malcolm said. "Something about a brave warrior captured by a king who offered him his choice of deaths. Burning, drowning, crushing, hanging, decapitation. The warrior said he would take them all, and he went from island to island, experiencing the various challenges, sort of a New World version of the labors of Hercules." "So that's what it is," Kelly said, and ran out of the room. Malcolm looked blank. He turned to Thorne, who shrugged. Kelly returned, carrying the German children's book in her hand. She gave it to Malcolm. Yes, he said, die 5 Todesarten, the 5 ways of death. Interesting that it is in German. He has lots of German books, Kelly said. Does he? That bastard, he never told me. That means something? Kelly said. Yes, it means a lot. Hand me that magnifying glass, would you? Kelly gave him a magnifying glass from the desk. What does it mean? The 5 deaths are ancient volcanic islands, he said, which means that they are geologically very rich. Back in the 1920s, the Germans wanted to mine them. He peered at the images, squinting. Ah, yes, these are the islands, no question. Mantanceros, Muerte, Tacaño, Sorna, Pena. All names of death and destruction. All right, I think we may be close. Do we have any satellite pictures with spectrographic analyses of the cloud cover? Arby said, Is that going to help you find Site B? What? Malcolm spun around. What do you know about Site B? Arby was sitting at the computer, still working. Nothing. Just that Dr. Levine was looking for Site B, and it was the name in the files. What files? I've recovered some InGen files from this computer, and searching through old records I've found references to Site B, but they're pretty confusing, like this one. He leaned back to let Malcolm look at the screen. Summary. Plan revisions number 35. Production, Site B. Air handlers, grade 5 to grade 7. Lab structure, 400 cmm to 510 cmm. Biosecurity, level PK3 to level PK5. Conveyor rates, 3 mpm to 2.5 mpm. Holding pens, 13 hectares to 26 hectares. Staff queue, 17 for administrative to 19 for administrative. COM protocol, ET VX to RDT VX. Malcolm frowned. Curious, but not very helpful. It doesn't tell us which island, or even if it's on an island at all. What else have you got? Well, Arby flicked keys. Let's see, there's this. Site B Island Network Nodal Points, Malcolm said. Okay, so it's an island. And Site B has a network, but a network of what? Computers? Arby said. I don't know. Maybe a radio network. For what purpose? Malcolm said. What would a radio network be used for? This isn't very helpful. Arby shrugged. He took it as a challenge. He began typing furiously again, then said, Wait, here's another one. If I can just format it. There. Got it. He moved away from the screen so the others could see. Malcolm looked and said, Very good, very good. Site B Legends. Now we're getting somewhere, Malcolm said, scanning the listing. Can you print this out? Sure, Arby was beaming. Is it really good? It really is, Malcolm said. Kelly looked at Arby and said, Arb, those are the text labels that go with a map. Yeah, I think so. Pretty neat, huh? He pushed a button, sending the image to the printer. Malcolm peered at the listing some more, then turned his attention back to the satellite maps, looking closely at each one with the magnifying glass. His nose was just inches from the photographs. Arb, Kelly said, don't just sit there. Come on. Recover the map. That's what we need. I don't know if I can, Arby said. It's a proprietary 32-bit format. I mean, it's a big job. Stop whining, Arb. Just do it. Never mind, Malcolm said. He stepped away from the satellite images pinned on the wall. It's not important. It's not? Arby said, a little wounded. No, Arby, you can stop, because from what you've already discovered, I am quite certain we can identify the island right now. James. Ed James yawned and pushed the earpiece tighter into his ear. He wanted to make sure he got all this. He shifted in the driver's seat of his gray Taurus, trying to get comfortable, trying to stay awake. The small tape recorder was spinning in his lap next to his notepad and the crumpled papers from 2 Big Macs. James looked across the street at Levine's apartment building. The lights were on in the 3rd-floor apartment. And the bug he had placed there last week was working fine. Through his earpiece, he heard one of the kids say, "How?" And then the crippled guy, Malcolm, said, "The essence of verification is multiple lines of reasoning that converge at a single point." "Meaning what?" the kid said. Malcolm said, "Just look at the Landsat pictures." On his notepad, James wrote, "Landsat." "We already looked at those," the girl said. James felt foolish not to have realized earlier that these two kids were working for Levine. He remembered them well. They were in the class Levine taught. There was a short black kid and a gawky white girl. Just kids, maybe 11 or 12. He should have realized. Not that it mattered now, he thought. He was getting the information anyway. James reached across the dashboard and plucked out the last 2 French fries and ate them, even though they were cold. "Okay," he heard Malcolm say, "it's this island here. This is the island Levine went to." The girl said doubtfully, "You think so? This is Isla Sorna." James wrote, Isla Sorna. "That's our island," Malcolm said. "Why? 3 independent reasons. First, it's privately owned, so it hasn't been thoroughly searched by the Costa Rican government. Second, privately owned by whom? By the Germans, who leased rights to mineral excavations back in the 20s. All the German books. Exactly. Third, from Arby's list and from another independent source, it is clear that there is volcanic gas located at Site B. So, which islands have volcanic gas? Take the magnifying glass and look for yourself. Turns out only one island does." "You mean this here?" the girl said. "Right. That's volcanic smoke." "How do you know?" "Spectrographic analysis. See this spike here? That's elementary sulfur in the cloud cover. There aren't really any sources for sulfur except volcanic sources." "What's this other spike?" the girl said. "Methane," Malcolm said. "Apparently there is a fairly large source of methane gas." "Is that also volcanic?" Thorne said. "It might be. Methane is released from volcanic activity, but most commonly during active eruptions. The other possibility is it might be organic." "Organic meaning what?" "Large herbivores and—" Then there was something that James couldn't hear, and the kid said, "Do you want me to finish this recovery or not?" He sounded annoyed. "No," Thorne said. "Never mind now, Arby. We know what we have to do. Let's go, kids." James looked up at the apartment and saw the lights being turned off. A few minutes later, Thorne and the kids appeared at the front entrance on the street level. They got in a jeep and drove off. Malcolm went to his own car, climbed in awkwardly, and drove away in the opposite direction. James considered following Malcolm, but he had something else to do now. He turned on the car ignition, picked up the phone, and dialed. Field Systems. Half an hour later, when they got back to Thorne's office, Kelly stared, stunned. Most of the workers were gone, and the shed had been cleaned up. The 2 trailers and the Explorer stood side by side, freshly painted dark green and ready to go. "They're finished." "I told you they would be," Thorne said. He turned to his chief foreman, Eddie Carr, a stocky young man in his 20s. "Eddie, where are we?" "Just wrapping up, Doc," Eddie said. "Paint's still wet in a few places, but it should be dry by morning." "We can't wait until morning. We're moving out now." "We are?" Arby and Kelly exchanged glances. This was news to them, too. Thorne said, "I'll need you to drive one of these, Eddie. We've got to be at the airport by midnight." "But I thought we were field testing." "No time for that. We're going right to the location." The front door buzzed. "That'll be Malcolm, probably." He pushed the button to unlock the door. "You're not going to field test?" Eddie said with a worried look. "I think you better shake them down, Doc. We made some pretty complex modifications here, and—" "There's no time," Malcolm said, coming in. "We have to go right away." He turned to Thorne. "I'm very worried about him." "Eddie," Thorne said, "did the exit papers come in?" "Oh, sure, we've had them for the last 2 weeks." "Well, get them and call Jenkins. Tell him to meet us at the airport and do the details for us. I want to be off the ground in 4 hours. "Geez, Doc, just do it." Kelly said, "You're going to Costa Rica?" "That's right. We've got to get Levine if it's not too late." "We're coming with you," Kelly said. "Right," Arby said. "We are." "Absolutely not," Thorne said. "It's out of the question." "But we earned it. Dr. Levine talked to our parents. We already have permission." "You have permission," Thorne said severely, "to go on a field test in the woods 100 miles from here, but we're not doing that. We're going someplace that might be very dangerous, and you're not coming with us, and that's final." "But, kids," Thorne said, "don't piss me off. I'm going to make a phone call. You get your stuff together. You're going home." Then he turned and walked away. "Gee," Kelly said. Arby stuck his tongue out at the departing Thorne and muttered, "What an asshole." "Get with the program, Arby," Thorne said, not looking back. "You two guys are going home, period." He went into his office and slammed the door. Arby stuck his hands in his pockets. "They couldn't have figured it out without our help." "I know, Arb," she said, "but we can't make him take us." They turned to Malcolm. "Dr. Malcolm, can you please—" "Sorry," Malcolm said, "I can't." "But the answer is no, kids. It's just too dangerous." Dejected, they drifted over to the vehicles, gleaming beneath the ceiling lights. The Explorer with the black photovoltaic panels on the roof and hood, the inside crammed with glowing electronic equipment. Just looking at the Explorer gave them a sense of adventure, an adventure they would not be part of. Arby peered into the larger trailer, cupping his eyes over the window. "Wow, look at this!" "I'm going in," Kelly said, and she opened the door. She was momentarily surprised at how solid and heavy it was. Then she climbed up the steps into the trailer. Inside, the trailer was fitted out with gray upholstery and much more electronic equipment. It was divided into sections for different laboratory functions. The main area was a biological lab with specimen trays, dissecting pans, and microscopes that connected to video monitors. The lab also included biochemistry equipment, spectrometers, and a series of automated sample analyzers. Next to it there was an extensive computer section, a bank of processors, and a communications section. All the lab equipment was miniaturized and built into small tables that slid into the walls and then bolted down. "This is cool," Arby said. Kelly didn't answer. She was looking closely at the lab. Dr. Levine had designed this trailer, apparently, with a very specific purpose. There was no provision for geology or botany or chemistry or lots of other things that a field team might be expected to study. It wasn't a general scientific lab at all. There really seemed to be just a biology unit and a large computer unit. Biology and computers, period. What had this trailer been built to study? Set in the wall was a small bookshelf, the books held in place with a Velcro strap. She scanned the titles. Modeling Adaptive Biological Systems, Vertebrate Behavioral Dynamics, Adaptation in Natural and Artificial Systems, Dinosaurs of North America, Pre-Adaptation and Evolution. It seemed like a strange set of books to take on a wilderness expedition. If there was a logic behind it, she didn't see it. She moved on. At intervals along the walls, she could see where the trailer had been strengthened. Dark carbon honeycomb strips ran up the walls. She had overheard Thorne saying it was the same material used in supersonic jet fighters, very light and very strong. And she noticed that all the windows had been replaced with that special glass with fine wire mesh inside it. Why was the trailer so strong? It made her a little uneasy when she thought about it. She remembered the telephone call with Dr. Levine earlier in the day. He had said he was surrounded. Surrounded by what? He had said, "I can smell them, especially at night." What was he referring to? Who was them? Still uneasy, Kelly moved toward the back of the trailer, where there was a homey little living area, complete with gingham curtains on the windows. Compact kitchen, a toilet, and 4 beds. Storage compartments above and below the beds. There was even a little walk-in shower. It was nice. From there she went through the accordion pleating that connected the 2 trailers. It was a little bit like the connection between 2 railway cars. A short transitional passage. She emerged inside the second trailer, which seemed to be mostly utility storage, extra tires, spare parts, more lab equipment, shelves and cabinets. All the extra supplies that meant an expedition to some far-off place. There was even a motorcycle hanging off the back of the trailer. She tried some of the cabinets, but they were locked. But even here there were extra reinforcing strips as well. This section had also been built especially strong. Why? She wondered. Why so strong? "Look at this," Arby said, standing before a wall unit. It was a complex of glowing LED displays and lots of buttons, and looked to Kelly like a complicated thermostat. "What does it do?" Kelly said. "Monitors the whole trailer," he said. "You can do everything from here, all the systems, all the equipment. And look, there's TV." He pushed a button, and a monitor glowed to life. It showed Eddie walking toward them across the floor. "And hey, what's this?" Arby said. At the bottom of the display was a button with a security cover. He flipped the cover open. The button was silver and said DEF. "Hey, I bet this is that bear defense he was talking about." A moment later, Eddie opened the trailer door and said, "You better stop that. You'll drain the batteries. Come on now. You heard what the doc said. Time for you kids to go home." Kelly and Arby exchanged glances. "Okay," Kelly said. "We're going." Reluctantly, they left the trailer. They walked across the shed to Thorne's office to say goodbye. Arby said, "I wish he'd let us go." "Me too." "I don't want to stay home for break," he said. "They're just going to be working all the time." He meant his parents. "I know." Kelly didn't want to go home either. This idea of a field test during spring break was perfect for her because it got her out of the house and out of a bad situation. Her mother did data entry in an insurance company during the day, and at night she worked as a waitress at Denny's. So her mom was always busy at her jobs, and her latest boyfriend, Phil, tended to hang around the house a lot at night. It had been okay when Emily was there, too, but now Emily was studying nursing at the community college, so Kelly was alone in the house, and Phil was sort of creepy. But her mother liked Phil, so she never wanted to hear Kelly say anything bad about him. She just told Kelly to grow up. So now Kelly went to Thorne's office, hoping against hope that at the last minute he would relent. He was on the phone, his back to them. On the screen of his computer, they saw one of the satellite images they had taken from Levine's apartment. Thorne was zooming in on the image, successive magnifications. They knocked on the door, opened it a little. "Bye, Dr. Thorne." "See you, Dr. Thorne." Thorne turned, holding the phone to his ear. "Bye, kids." He gave a brief wave. Kelly hesitated. "Listen, could we just talk to you for a minute about—" Thorne shook his head. "No." "But—" "No, Kelly. I've got to place this call now," he said. "It's already 4 a.m. in Africa, and in a little while she'll go to sleep." "Who?" "Sarah Harding." "Sarah Harding is coming too?" she said, lingering at the door. "I don't know," Thorne shrugged. "Have a good vacation, kids. See you in a week. Thanks for your help. Now get out of here." He looked across the shed. "Eddie, the kids are leaving. Show them to the door and lock them out. Get me those papers and pack a bag. You're coming with me." Then, in a different voice, he said, "Yes, operator, I'm still waiting." And he turned away. Harding. Through the night vision goggles, the world appeared in shades of fluorescent green. Sarah Harding stared out at the African savanna. Directly ahead, above the high grass, she saw the rocky outcrop of a kopje. Bright green pinpoints glowed back from the boulders, probably rock hyraxes, she thought, or some other small rodent. Standing up in her jeep, wearing a sweatshirt against the cool night air, feeling the weight of the goggles, she turned her head slowly. She could hear the yelping in the night, and she was trying to locate the source. Even from her high vantage point, standing up in the vehicle, she knew the animals would be hidden from direct view. She turned slowly north, looking for movement in the grass. She saw none. She looked back quickly, the green world swirling momentarily. Now she faced south, and she saw them. The grass rippled in a complex pattern as the pack raced forward, yelping and barking, prepared to attack. She caught a glimpse of the female she called Face 1, or F1. F1 was distinguished by a white streak between her eyes. F1 loped along in the peculiar sideways gait of hyenas. Her teeth were bared. She glanced back at the rest of the pack, noting their position. Sarah Harding swung the glasses through the darkness, looking ahead of the pack. She saw the prey, a herd of African buffalo standing belly-deep in the grass, agitated. They were bellowing and stamping their feet. The hyenas yelped louder, a pattern of sound that would confuse the prey. They rushed through the herd, trying to break it up, trying to separate the calves from their mothers. African buffalo looked dull and stupid, but in fact they were among the most dangerous large African mammals. Heavy, powerful creatures with sharp horns and notoriously mean dispositions. The hyenas could not hope to bring down an adult unless it was injured or sick, but they would try to take a calf. Sitting behind the wheel of the jeep, McKenna, her assistant, said, "You want to move closer?" "No, this is fine." In fact, it was more than fine. Their jeep was on a slight rise, and they had a better-than-average view. With any luck, she would record the entire attack pattern. She turned on the video camera, mounted on a tripod 5 feet above her head, and dictated rapidly into the tape recorder. F1 south, F2 and F5 flanking 20 yards, F3 center, F6 circling wide east, can't see F7, F8 circling north, F1 straight through. Disrupting, herd moving, stamping. There's F7, straight through, F8 angling through from the north, coming out, circling again. This was classic hyena behavior. The lead animals ran through the herd while others circled it, then came in from the sides. The buffalo can't keep track of their attackers. She listened to the herd bellowing even as the group panicked, broke its tight clustered formation. The big animals moved apart, turning, looking. Harding couldn't see the calves. They were below the grass, but she could hear their plaintive cries. Now the hyenas came back. The buffalo stamped their feet, lowered their big heads menacingly. The grass rippled as the hyenas circled, yelping and barking, the sounds more staccato. She caught a brief glimpse of female F8, her jaws already red, but Harding hadn't seen the actual attack. The buffalo herd moved a short distance to the east, where it regrouped. One female buffalo now stood apart from the herd. She bellowed continuously at the hyenas. They must have taken her calf. Harding felt frustrated. It had happened so swiftly, too swiftly, which could only mean that the hyenas had been lucky, or the calf was injured. Or perhaps very young, even newborn. A few of the buffalo were still calving. She would have to review the videotape to try and reconstruct what had happened. The perils of studying fast-moving nocturnal animals, she thought. But there was no question they had taken an animal. All the hyenas were clustered around a single area of grass. They yelped and jumped. She saw F3, and then F5, their muzzles bloody. Now the pups came up, squealing to get at the kill. The adults immediately made room for them, helped them to eat. Sometimes they pulled away flesh from the carcass and held it so the young ones could eat. Their behavior was familiar to Sarah Harding, who had become in recent years the foremost expert on hyenas in the world. When she first reported her findings, she was greeted with disbelief and even outrage from colleagues who disputed her results in very personal terms. She was attacked for being a woman, for being attractive, for having an overbearing feminist perspective. The university reminded her she was on tenure track. Colleagues shook their heads, but Harding had persisted, and slowly, over time, as more data accumulated, her view of hyenas had come to be accepted. Still, hyenas would never be appealing creatures, she thought, watching them feed. They were ungainly, heads too big and bodies sloping, coats ragged and mottled, gait awkward, vocalizations too reminiscent of an unpleasant laugh. In an increasingly urban world of concrete skyscrapers, wild animals were romanticized, classified as noble or ignoble, heroes or villains. And in this media-driven world, hyenas were simply not photogenic enough to be admirable. Long since cast as the laughing villains of the African plain, they were hardly thought worth a systematic study until Harding had begun her own research. What she had discovered cast hyenas in a very different light. Brave hunters and attentive parents, they lived in a remarkably complex social structure, and a matriarchy as well. As for their notorious yelping vocalizations, they actually represented an extremely sophisticated form of communication. She heard a roar, and through her night vision goggles saw the first of the lions approaching the kill. It was a large female, circling closer. The hyenas barked and snapped at the lioness, guiding their own pups off into the grass. Within a few moments, other lions appeared and settled down to feed on the hyena's kill. Now, lions, she thought, there was a truly nasty animal. Although called the king of beasts, lions in truth were actually violent. The phone rang. "McKenna?" she said. The phone rang again. Who could be calling her now? She frowned. Through the goggles, she saw the lionesses look up, heads turning in the night. McKenna was fumbling beneath the dashboard looking for the phone. It rang 3 more times before he found it. She heard him say, "Jumbo, Mizzy." "Yes, Dr. Harding is here." He handed the phone up to her. "It's Dr. Thorne." Reluctantly she removed her night goggles and took the phone. She knew Thorne well. He had designed most of the equipment in her Jeep. "Doc, this better be important." "It is," Thorne said. "I'm calling about Richard." "What about him?" She caught his concern, but didn't understand why. Lately, Levine had been a pain in the neck, telephoning her almost daily from California, picking her brains about field work with animals. He had lots of questions about hides and blinds, data protocols, record-keeping. It went on and on. "Did he ever tell you what he intended to study?" Thorne asked. "No," she said. "Why?" "Nothing at all?" "No," Harding said. "He was very secretive, but I gathered he'd located an animal population that he could use to make some point about biological systems. You know how obsessive he is. Why?" "Well, he's missing, Sarah. Malcolm and I think he's in some kind of trouble. We've located him on an island in Costa Rica, and we're going to get him now." "Now?" she said. "Tonight. We're flying to San Jose in a few hours. Ian's going with me. We want you to come too." "Doc," she said, "even if I took a flight out of Seronera tomorrow morning to Nairobi, it'd take me almost a day to get there, and that's if I got lucky. I mean—" "You decide," Thorne said, interrupting. "I'll give you the details, and you decide what you want to do." He gave her the information, and she wrote it on the notepad strapped to her wrist. Then Thorne rang off. She stood staring out at the African night, feeling the cool breeze on her face. Off in the darkness she heard the growl of the lions at the kill. Her work was here. Her life was here. McKenna said, "Dr. Harding, what do we do?" "Go back," she said. "I have to pack." "You're leaving?" "Yes," she said. "I'm leaving." Message. Thorne drove to the airport, the lights of San Francisco disappearing behind them. Malcolm sat in the passenger seat. He looked back at the Explorer driving behind them and said, "Does Eddie know what this is all about?" "Yes," Thorne said, "but I'm not sure he believes it." "And the kids don't know?" "No," Thorne said. There was a beeping alongside him. Thorne pulled out his little black Envoy, a radio pager. A light was flashing. He flipped up the screen and handed it to Malcolm. "Read it for me." "It's from RB," Malcolm said. "Says, 'Have a good trip. If you want us, call. We'll be standing by if you need our help,' and he gives his phone number." Thorne laughed. "You gotta love those kids. They never give up." Then he frowned as a thought occurred to him. "What's the time on that message?" 4 minutes ago, Malcolm said. "Came in via Netcom." "Okay, just checking." They turned right toward the airport. They saw the lights in the distance. Malcolm stared forward gloomily. "It's very unwise for us to be rushing off like this. It's not the right way to go about it." Thorne said, "We should be all right, as long as we have the right island." "We do," Malcolm said. "How do you know?" The most important clue was something I didn't want the kids to know about. A few days ago, Levine saw the carcass of one of the animals. Oh? Yes, he had a chance to look at it before the officials burned it, and he discovered that it was tagged. He cut the tag off and sent it to me. Tagged? You mean like, yes, like a biological specimen. The tag was old, and it showed pitting from sulfuric acid. Must be volcanic, Thorne said. Exactly. And you said it was an old tag? Several years, Malcolm said. But the most interesting finding was the way the animal died. Levine concluded the animal had been injured while it was still alive, a deep slashing cut in the leg that went right down to the bone. Thorne said, "You're saying the animal was injured by another dinosaur?" "Yes, exactly." They drove a moment in silence. "Who else besides us knows about this island?" "I don't know," Malcolm said, "but somebody's trying to find out. My office was broken into today and photographed." "Great," Thorne sighed. "But you didn't know where the island was, did you?" "No, I hadn't put it together yet." "Do you think anybody else has?" "No," Malcolm said. "We're on our own." Exploitation. Louis Dodgson threw open the door marked Animal Quarters, and immediately all the dogs began barking. Dodgson walked down the corridor between the rows of cages, stacked 10 feet high on both sides. The building was large. The Biosyn Corporation of Cupertino, California, required an extensive animal testing facility. Walking alongside him, Rossiter, the head of the company, gloomily brushed the lapels of his Italian suit. "I hate this fucking place," he said. "Why did you want me to come here?" "Because," Dodgson said, "we need to talk about the future." "Stinks in here," Rossiter said. He glanced at his watch. "Get on with it, Lou." "We can talk in here." Dodgson led him to a glass-walled superintendent's booth in the center of the building. The glass cut down the sound of the barking, but through the windows they could look out at the rows of animals. "It's simple," Dodgson said, starting to pace, "but I think it's important." Louis Dodgson was 45 years old, bland-faced and balding. His features were youthful, and his manner was mild, but appearances were deceiving. The baby-faced Dodgson was one of the most ruthless and aggressive geneticists of his generation. Controversy had dogged his career. As a graduate student at Hopkins, he had been dismissed for planning human gene therapy without FDA permission. Later, after joining Biosyn, he had conducted a controversial rabies vaccine test in Chile. The illiterate farmers who were the subjects were never informed they were being tested. In each case, Dodgson explained that he was a scientist in a hurry and could not be held back by regulations drawn up for lesser souls. He called himself results-oriented, which really meant he did whatever he considered necessary to achieve his goal. He was also a tireless self-promoter. Within the company, Dodgson presented himself as a researcher, even though he lacked the ability to do original research and had never done any. His intellect was fundamentally derivative. He never conceived of anything until someone else had thought of it first. He was very good at developing research, which meant stealing someone else's work at an early stage. In this he was without scruple and without peer. For many years he had run the reverse engineering section at Biosyn, which in theory examined competitors' products and determined how they were made. But in practice, reverse engineering involved a great deal of industrial espionage. Rossiter, of course, had no illusions about Dodgson. He disliked him and avoided him as much as possible. Dodgson was always taking chances, cutting corners. He made Rossiter uneasy. But Rossiter also knew that modern biotechnology was highly competitive. To stay competitive, every company needed a man like Dodgson, and Dodgson was very good at what he did. "I'll come right to the point," Dodgson said, turning to Rossiter. "If we act quickly, I believe we have an opportunity to acquire the InGen technology." Rossiter sighed. "Not again." "I know, Jeff. I know how you feel. I admit there is some history here." "History? The only history is you failed. Time and again. We've tried this, back door and front door. Hell, we even tried to buy the company when it was in Chapter 11 because you told us it would be available, but it turned out it wasn't. The Japanese wouldn't sell." "I understand, Jeff, but let's not forget—" "What I can't forget," Rossiter said, "is that we paid $750,000 to your friend Nedry and have nothing to show for it." "But, Jeff—" "Then we paid $500,000 to that Daiichi marriage broker. Nothing to show for that either. Our attempts to acquire InGen technology have been a complete fucking failure. That's what I can't forget." "But the point," Dodgson said, "is that we kept trying for a good reason. This technology is vital to the future of the company." "So you say." "The world is changing, Jeff. I'm talking about solving one of the major problems this company faces in the 21st century." "Which is?" Dodgson pointed out the window at the barking dogs. "Animal testing. Let's face it, Jeff, every year we get more pressure not to use animals for testing and research. Every year, more demonstrations, more break-ins, more bad press. First it was just simple-minded zealots and Hollywood celebrities, but now it's a bandwagon. Even university philosophers are beginning to argue that it's unethical for monkeys and dogs and even rats to be subjected to the indignities of laboratory research. We've even had some protests about our exploitation of squid, even though they're on dinner tables all over the world. I'm telling you, Jeff, there's no end to this trend. Eventually, somebody's going to say we can't even exploit bacteria to make genetic products." "Oh, come on. Just wait, it'll happen. And it'll shut us down. Unless we have a genuinely created animal. Consider, an animal that is extinct and is brought back to life is for all practical purposes not an animal at all. It can't have any rights. It's already extinct. So if it exists, it can only be something we have made. We made it. We patent it. We own it. And it is a perfect research testbed. And we believe that the enzyme and hormone systems of dinosaurs are identical to mammalian systems. In the future, drugs can be tested on small dinosaurs as successfully as they are now tested on dogs and rats, with much less risk of legal challenge." Rossiter was shaking his head. "You think?" "I know. They're basically big lizards, Jeff. And nobody loves a lizard. They're not like these cute doggies that lick your hand and break your heart. Lizards have no personality. They're snakes with legs." Rossiter sighed. "Jeff, we're talking about real freedom here, because at the moment everything to do with living animals is tied up in legal and moral knots. Big game hunters can't shoot a lion or an elephant, the same animals their fathers and grandfathers used to shoot and then pose proudly for a photo. Now there are forms, licenses, expenses, and plenty of guilt. These days you don't dare shoot a tiger and admit it afterward. In the modern world, it's a much more serious transgression to shoot a tiger than to shoot your parents. Tigers have advocates. But now imagine a specially stocked hunting preserve, maybe somewhere in Asia, where individuals of wealth and importance could hunt tyrannosaurs and triceratops in a natural setting. It would be an incredibly desirable attraction. How many hunters have a stuffed elk head on their wall? The world's full of them. But how many can claim to have a snarling Tyrannosaurus head hanging above the wet bar?" "You're not serious." "I'm trying to make a point here, Jeff. These animals are totally exploitable. We can do anything we want with them." Rossiter stood up from the table, put his hands in his pockets. He sighed, then looked up at Dodgson. "The animals still exist?" Dodgson nodded slowly. "And you know where they are?" Dodgson nodded. "Okay," Rossiter said. Do it." He turned toward the door, then paused, looked back. "But, Lou," he said, "let's be clear, this is it. This is absolutely the last time. Either you get the animals now or it's over. This is the last time. Got it?" "Don't worry," Dodgson said. "This time I'll get them." Third configuration. In the intermediate phase, swiftly developing complexity within the system hides the risk of imminent chaos. But the risk is there. Ian Malcolm. Costa Rica. There was a drenching downpour in Puerto Cortes. Rain drummed on the roof of the little metal shed beside the airfield. Dripping wet, Thorne stood and waited while the Costa Rican official went over the papers again and again. Rodriguez was his name, and he was just a kid in his 20s wearing an ill-fitting uniform, terrified of making a mistake. Thorne looked out at the runway where, in the soft dawn light, the cargo containers were being clamped to the bellies of two big Huey helicopters. Eddie Carr was out there in the rain with Malcolm, shouting as the workmen secured the clamps. Rodriguez shuffled the papers. "Now, Senor Thorne, according to this, your destination is Isla Sorna." "That's right." "And your containers have only vehicles?" "Yes, that's right, research vehicles." "Sorna is a primitive place. There is no petrol, no supplies, not even any roads to speak of." "Have you been there?" "Myself, no. People here have no interest in this island. It is a wild spot, rock and jungle. And there is no place for a boat to land except in very special weather conditions. For example, today one cannot go there." "I understand," Thorne said. "I just wish that you will be prepared," Rodriguez said, "for the difficulties you will find there." "I think we're prepared." "You are taking adequate petrol for your vehicles?" Thorne sighed. Why bother to explain? "Yes, we are." "And there are just 3 of you, Dr. Malcolm, yourself, and your assistant, Senor Carr?" "Correct." "And your intended stay is less than 1 week?" "That's correct, more like 2 days. With any luck, we expect to be off the island sometime tomorrow." Rodriguez shuffled the papers again, as if looking for a hidden clue. "Well—" "Is there a problem?" Thorne said, glancing at his watch. "No problem, senor. Your permits are signed by the Director General of the Biological Preserves. They are in order." Rodriguez hesitated. "But it is very unusual that such a permit would be granted at all." "Why is that?" "I do not know the details, but there was some trouble on one of the islands a few years ago, and since then the Department of Biological Preserves has closed all the Pacific Islands to tourists." "We're not tourists," Thorne said. "I understand that, Senor Thorne." More shuffling of papers. Thorne waited. Out on the runway, the container clamps locked in place and the containers lifted off the ground. "Very well, Senor Thorne," Rodriguez said finally, stamping the papers. "I wish you good luck." "Thank you," Thorne said. He tucked the papers in his pocket, ducked his head against the rain, and ran back out on the runway. 3 miles offshore, the helicopters broke through the coastal cloud layer into early morning sunlight. From the cockpit of the lead Huey, Thorne could look up and down the coast. He saw 5 islands at various distances offshore, harsh, rocky pinnacles rising out of rough blue sea. The islands were each several miles apart, undoubtedly part of an old volcanic chain. He pressed the speaker button. "Which is Sorna?" The pilot pointed ahead. "We call them the 5 deaths," he said. "Isla Muerte, Isla Matanceros, Isla Pena, Isla Tacaño, and Isla Sorna, which is the big one farthest north." "Have you been there?" "Never, senor, but I believe there will be a landing site." "How do you know?" "Some years ago there was some flights there. I have heard the Americans would come and fly there sometimes." "Not Germans?" No. There have been no Germans since, I do not know, the World War." They were Americans that came." "When was that?" "I am not sure. Perhaps 10 years ago." The helicopter turned north, passing over the nearest island. Thorne glimpsed rugged, volcanic terrain, overgrown with dense jungle. There was no sign of life or of human habitation. "To the local people, these islands are not happy places," the pilot said. "They say no good comes from here." He smiled. "But they do not know. They are superstitious Indians." Now they were over open water, with Isla Sorna directly ahead. It was clearly an old volcanic crater, bare, reddish-gray rock walls, an eroded cone. "Where do the boats land?" The pilot pointed to where the sea surged and crashed against the cliffs. "On the east side of this island there are many caves made by the waves. Some of the local people call this Isla Gemido. It means groan from the sound of the waves inside the caves. Some of the caves go all the way through to the interior, and a boat can pass through at certain times, but not in weather as you see it now." Thorne thought of Sarah Harding. If she was coming, she would land later today. "I have a colleague who may be arriving this afternoon," he said. "Can you bring her out?" "I am sorry," the pilot said. "We have a job in Gulf of Juan. We will not be back until tonight." "What can she do?" The pilot squinted at the sea. "Perhaps she can come by boat. The sea changes by the hour. She might have luck." "And you will come back for us tomorrow?" "Yes, Senor Thorne, we will come in the early morning. It is the best time for the winds." The helicopter approached from the west, rising several hundred feet, moving over the rocky cliffs to reveal the interior of Isla Gemido. It appeared just like the others. Volcanic ridges and ravines, heavily overgrown with dense jungle. It was beautiful from the air, but Thorne knew it would be dauntingly difficult to move through that terrain. He stared down, looking for roads. The helicopter thumped lower, circling the central area of the island. Thorne saw no buildings, no roads. The helicopter descended toward the jungle. The pilot said, "Because of the cliffs, the winds here are very bad. Many gusts and updrafts. There is only one place on the island where it is safe to land." He peered out the window. "Ah, yes, there." Thorne saw an open clearing, overgrown with tall grass. "We'll land there," the pilot said. Isla Sorna. Eddie Carr stood in the tall grass of the clearing, turned away from the flying dust as the two helicopters lifted off the ground and rose into the sky. In a few moments they were small specks, their sound fading. Eddie shaded his eyes as he looked upward. In a forlorn voice he said, "When are they coming back?" "Tomorrow morning," Thorne said. "We'll have found Levine by then." "At least we'd better," Malcolm said. And then the helicopters were gone, disappearing over the high rim of the crater. Carr stood with Thorne and Malcolm in the clearing, enveloped in morning heat and deep silence on the island. "Kind of creepy here," Eddie said, pulling his baseball cap down lower over his eyes. Eddie Carr was 24 years old, raised in Daly City. Physically he was dark-haired, compact and strong. His body was thick, the muscles bunched, but his hands were elegant, the fingers long and tapered. Eddie had a talent, Thorne would have said a genius, for mechanical things. Eddie could build anything and fix anything. He could see how things worked just by looking at them. Thorne had hired him 3 years earlier, his first job out of community college. It was supposed to be a temporary job, earning money so he could go back to school and get an advanced degree. But Thorne had long since become dependent on Eddie, and Eddie, for his part, wasn't much interested in going back to the books. At the same time, he hadn't counted on anything like this, he thought, looking around him at the clearing. Eddie was an urban kid, accustomed to the action of the city, the honk of horns and the rush of traffic. This desolate silence made him uneasy. "Come on," Thorne said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Let's get started." They turned to the cargo containers left by the helicopter. They were sitting a few yards away in the tall grass. "Can I help?" Malcolm said, a few yards away. "If you don't mind, no," Eddie said. "We'd better unpack these ourselves." They spent half an hour unbolting the rear panels, lowering them to the ground, and entering the containers. After that, they took only a few minutes to release the vehicles. Eddie got behind the wheel of the Explorer and flicked on the ignition. There was hardly any sound, just a soft whir of the vacuum pump starting up. Thorne said, "How's your charge?" "Full," Eddie said. "Batteries okay?" "Yeah, seem fine." Eddie was relieved. He had supervised the conversion of these vehicles to electric power, but it was a rushed job and they hadn't had time to test them thoroughly afterward. And though it was true that electric cars employed less complex technology than the internal combustion engine, that chugging relic of the 19th century, Eddie knew that taking untested equipment into the field was always risky, especially when that equipment also used the latest technology. That fact troubled Eddie more than he was willing to admit. Like most born mechanics, he was deeply conservative. He liked things to work no matter what. And to him that meant using established, proven technology. Unfortunately, he had been voted down this time. Eddie had two particular areas of concern. One was the black photovoltaic panels with their rows of octagonal silicon wafers mounted on the roof and hood of the vehicles. These panels were efficient and much less fragile than the old photovoltaics. Eddie had mounted them with special vibration-damping units of his own design, but the fact remained, if the panels were injured in any way, they would no longer be able to charge the vehicles or run the electronics. All their systems would stop dead. His other concern was the batteries themselves. Thorne had selected the new lithium-ion batteries from Nissan, which were extremely efficient on a weight basis. But they were still experimental, which to Eddie was just a polite word for unreliable. Eddie had argued for backups. He had argued for a little gasoline generator just in case. He had argued for lots of things, and he had always been voted down. Under the circumstances, Eddie did the only sensible thing. He built in a few extras and didn't tell anybody about it. He was pretty sure Thorne knew he had done that, but Thorne never said anything, and Eddie never brought it up. But now that he was here, on this island, in the middle of nowhere, he was glad he had. Because the fact was, you never knew. Thorne watched as Eddie backed the Explorer out of the container and into the high grass. Eddie left the car in the middle of the clearing where the sunlight would strike the panels and top up the charge. Thorne got behind the wheel of the first trailer and backed it out. It was odd to drive a vehicle which was so quiet. The loudest sound was the tires on the metal container. And once it was on the grass, there was hardly any sound at all. Thorne climbed out and linked up the two trailers, locking them together with a flexible steel accordion connector. Finally, he turned to the motorcycle. It, too, was electric. Thorne rolled it to the rear of the Explorer, lifted it onto brackets, hooked the power cord into the same system that ran the vehicle, and recharged the battery. He stepped back. "That does it." In the hot, quiet clearing, Eddie stared toward the high circular rim of the crater, rising in the distance above the dense jungle. The bare rock shimmered in the morning heat, the walls forbidding and harsh. He had a sense of desolation, of entrapment. "Why would anyone ever come here?" he said. Malcolm, leaning on his cane, smiled. "To get away from it all, Eddie. Don't you ever want to get away from it all?" "Not if I can help it," Eddie said. "Me? I always like a Pizza Hut nearby, you know what I mean?" "Well, you're a ways from one now." Thorne returned to the back panel of the trailer and pulled out a pair of heavy rifles. Beneath the barrel of each hung 2 aluminum canisters, side by side. He handed one rifle to Eddie, showed the other to Malcolm. "You ever seen these?" "Read about them," Malcolm said. "This is the Swedish thing?" "Right. Lindstrad air gun, most expensive rifle in the world. Rugged, simple, accurate, and reliable. Fires a subsonic Fluger impact delivery dart containing whatever compound you want." Thorne cracked open the cartridge bank, revealing a row of plastic containers filled with straw-colored liquid. Each cartridge was tipped with a 3-inch needle. We've loaded the enhanced venom of Conus purpurascens, the South Sea cone shell. It's the most powerful neurotoxin in the world. Acts within a 2,000th of a second. It's faster than the nerve conduction velocity. The animal's down before it feels the prick of the dart. Lethal? Thorne nodded. No screwing around here. Just remember, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot with this because you'll be dead before you realize that you've pulled the trigger. Malcolm nodded. Is there an antidote? No, but what's the point? There'd be no time to administer it if there was. That makes things simple, Malcolm said, taking the gun. Just thought you ought to know, Thorne said. Eddie, let's get going. The stream. Eddie climbed into the Explorer. Thorne and Malcolm climbed into the cab of the trailer. A moment later, the radio clicked. Eddie said, You putting up the database, Doc? Right now, Thorne said. He plugged the optical disc into the dashboard slot. On the small monitor facing him, he saw the island appear, but it was largely obscured behind patches of cloud. What good is that? Malcolm said. Just wait, Thorne said. It's a system. It's going to sum data. Data from what? Radar. In a moment, a satellite radar image overlaid the photograph. The radar could penetrate the clouds. Thorne pressed a button, and the computer traced the edges, enhancing details, highlighting the faint, spidery track of the road system. Pretty slick, Malcolm said. But to Thorne he seemed tense. I've got it, Eddie said on the radio. Malcolm said, He can see the same thing? Yes, on his dashboard. But I don't have the GPS, Eddie said anxiously. Isn't it working? You guys, Thorne said. Give it a minute. It's reading the optical. Way stations are coming up. There was a cone-shaped global positioning sensor mounted in the roof of the trailer. Taking radio data from orbiting navigation satellites thousands of miles overhead, the GPS could calculate the position of the vehicles within a few yards. In a moment, a flashing red X appeared on the map of the island. Okay, Eddie said on the radio. I got it. Looks like a road leading out of the clearing to the north. That where we're going? I'd say so, Thorne said. According to the map, the road twisted several miles across the interior of the island before finally reaching a place where all the roads seemed to meet. There was the suggestion of buildings there, but it was hard to be sure. Okay, Doc, here we go. Eddie drove past him and took the lead. Thorne stepped on the accelerator, and the trailer hummed forward, following the Explorer. Beside him, Malcolm was silent, fiddling with a small notebook computer on his lap. He never looked out the window. In a few moments they had left the clearing behind and were moving through dense jungle. Thorne's panel lights flashed. The vehicle switched to its batteries. There wasn't enough sunlight coming through the trees to power the trailer anymore. They drove on. How you doing, Doc? Eddie said. You holding charge? Just fine, Eddie. He sounds nervous, Malcolm said. Just worried about the equipment. The hell, Eddie said. I'm worried about me. Although the road was overgrown and in poor condition, they made good progress. After about 10 minutes, they came to a small stream with muddy banks. The Explorer started across it, then stopped. Eddie got out, stepping over rocks in the water, walking back. What is it? I saw something, Doc. Thorne and Malcolm got out of the trailer and stood on the banks of the stream. They heard the distant cries of what sounded like birds. Malcolm looked up, frowning. Birds? Thorne said. Malcolm shook his head. No. Eddie bent over and plucked a strip of cloth out of the mud. It was dark green Gore-Tex, with a strip of leather sewn along one edge. That's from one of our expedition packs, he said. The one we made for Levine? Yes, Doc. You put a sensor in the pack? Thorne asked. They usually sewed location sensors inside their expedition packs. Yes. May I see that? Malcolm asked. He took the strip of cloth and held it up to the light. He fingered the torn edge, thoughtfully. Thorne unclipped a small receiver from his belt. It looked like an oversized pager. He stared at the liquid crystal readout. "I'm not getting any signal." Eddie stared at the muddy bank. He bent over again. "Here's another piece of cloth. And another. Seems like the pack was ripped into shreds, Doc." Another bird cry floated toward them, distant, unworldly. Malcolm stared off in the distance, trying to locate its source. And then he heard Eddie say, "Uh-oh, we have company." There were a half-dozen bright green, lizard-like animals standing in a group near the trailer. They were about the size of chickens, and they chirped animatedly. They stood upright on their hind legs, balancing with their tails straight out. When they walked, their heads bobbed up and down in nervous little jerks, exactly like a chicken. And they made a distinctive squeaking sound, very reminiscent of a bird. Yet they looked like lizards with long tails. They had quizzical, alert faces, and they cocked their heads when they looked at the men. Eddie said, "What is this, a salamander convention?" The green lizards stood, watched. Several more appeared from beneath the trailer and from the foliage nearby. Soon there were a dozen lizards, watching and chittering. "Compes," Malcolm said. "Procompsognathus triassicus is the actual name." "You mean these are—" "Yes, they're dinosaurs." Eddie frowned, stared. "I didn't know they came so small," he said finally. "Dinosaurs were mostly small," Malcolm said. "People always think they were huge, but the average dinosaur was the size of a sheep or a small pony." Eddie said, "They look like chickens." "Yes, very bird-like." "Is there any danger?" Thorne said. "Not really," Malcolm said. "They're small scavengers like jackals. They feed on dead animals. But I wouldn't get close. Their bite is mildly poisonous." "I'm not getting close," Eddie said. "They give me the creeps. It's like they're not scared." Malcolm had noticed that, too. "I imagine it's because there haven't been any human beings on this island. These animals don't have any reason to fear man." "Well, let's give them a reason," Eddie said. He picked up a rock. "Hey," Malcolm said, "don't do that. The whole idea is—" But Eddie had already thrown the rock. It landed near a cluster of compes, and the lizards ducked away, but the others hardly moved. A few of them hopped up and down, showing agitation. But the group stayed where they were. They just chittered and cocked their heads. "Weird," Eddie said. He sniffed the air. "You notice that smell?" "Yes," Malcolm said. "They have a distinctive odor." "Rotten is more like it," Eddie said. "They smell rotten, like something dead. And you ask me, it's not natural. Animals that don't show fear like that. What if they have rabies or something?" "They don't," Malcolm said. "How do you know?" "Because only mammals carry rabies." But even as he said it, he wondered if that was right. Warm-blooded animals carried rabies. Were the compes warm-blooded? He wasn't sure. There was a rustling sound from above. Malcolm looked up at the canopy of trees overhead. He saw movement in the high foliage as unseen small animals jumped from branch to branch. He heard squeaks and chirps, distinctly animal sounds. "Those aren't birds up there," Thorne said. "Monkeys?" "Maybe," Malcolm said. "I doubt it." Eddie shivered. "I say we get out of here." He returned to the stream and climbed into the Explorer. Malcolm walked cautiously with Thorne back to the trailer entrance. The compes parted around them, but still did not run away. They stood all around their legs, chittering excitedly. Malcolm and Thorne climbed into the trailer and closed the doors, being careful not to shut them on the little creatures. Thorne sat behind the wheel and turned on the motor. Ahead, they saw that Eddie was already driving the Explorer through the stream and heading up the sloping ridge on the far side. "The, Procompsa whatevers," Eddie said over the radio. "They're real, aren't they?" "Oh, yes," Malcolm said softly. They're real. The road. Thorne was uneasy. He was beginning to understand how Eddie felt. He had built these vehicles, and he had an uncomfortable sense of isolation, of being in this faraway place with untested equipment. The road continued steeply upward through dark jungle for the next 15 minutes. Inside the trailer, it grew uncomfortably warm. Sitting beside him, Malcolm said, "Air conditioning?" "I don't want to drain the battery." "Mind if I open the window?" "If you think it's all right," Thorne said. Malcolm shrugged. "Why not?" He pushed the button, and the power window rolled down. Warm air blew into the car. He glanced back at Thorne. "Nervous, Doc?" "Sure," Thorne said. "Damn right I am." Even with the window open, he felt sweat running down his chest as he drove. Over the radio, Eddie was saying, "I'm telling you, we should have tested first, Doc. Should have done it by the book. You don't come to a place with poisonous chickens if you're not sure your vehicles will hold up." "The cars are fine," Thorne said. "How's your levels?" "High normal," Eddie said. "Just great. Of course, we've only gone 5 miles. It's 9 in the morning, Doc." The road swung right, then left, following a series of switchbacks as the terrain became steeper. Hauling the big trailers, Thorne had to concentrate on his driving. It was a relief to focus his attention. Ahead of them, the explorer turned left, going higher up the road. "I don't see any more animals," Eddie said. He sounded relieved. Finally, the road flattened out as it turned, following the crest of the ridge. According to the GPS display, they were now heading northwest toward the interior of the island. But the jungle still hemmed them in on all sides. They could not see much beyond the dense walls of foliage. They came to a Y intersection in the road, and Eddie pulled over to the side. Thorne saw that in the crook of the Y was a faded wooden sign with arrows pointing in both directions. To the left, the sign said, "To Swamp." To the right was another arrow and the words, "To Site B." Eddie said, "Guys, which way?" "Go to Site B," Malcolm said. "You got it." The explorer started down the right fork. Thorne followed. Off to the right, sulphurous yellow steam issued from the ground, bleaching the nearby foliage white. The smell was strong. "Volcanic," Thorne said to Malcolm, "just as you predicted." Driving past, they glimpsed a bubbling pool in the earth, crusted thick yellow around the edges. "Yeah," Eddie said, "but that's active. In fact, I'd say that—" "Holy shit!" Eddie's brake lights flashed on, and his car slammed to a stop. Thorne had to swerve, scraping jungle ferns on the side of the trailer to miss him. He pulled up alongside the explorer and glared at Eddie. "Eddie, for Pete's sake, will you—" But Eddie wasn't listening. He was staring straight forward, his mouth wide open. Thorne turned to look. Directly ahead, the trees along the road had been beaten down, creating a gap in the foliage. They could see all the way from the ridge road across the entire island to the west. But Thorne hardly registered the panoramic view, because all he saw was a large animal the size of a hippopotamus ambling across the road. Except it wasn't a hippopotamus. This animal was pale brown, its skin covered with large plate-like scales. Around its head it had a curving, bony crest, and rising from this crest were 2 blunted horns. A third horn protruded above its snout. Over the radio he heard Eddie breathing in shallow gasps. "You know what that is?" "That's a triceratops," Malcolm said. "A young one by the looks of it." "Must be," Eddie said. Ahead of them, a much larger animal now crossed the road. It was easily twice the size of the first, and its horns were long, curving, and sharp. "Because that's his mom." A third triceratops appeared, then a fourth. There was a whole herd of creatures ambling slowly across the road. They paid no attention to the vehicles as they crossed, passed through the gap, and descended down the hill, disappearing from view. Only then were the men able to see through the gap itself. Thorn had a view across a vast, marshy plain with a broad river coursing through the center. On either side of the river, animals grazed. There was a herd of perhaps 20 medium-sized, dark green dinosaurs to the south, their large heads intermittently poking up above the grass along the river. Nearby, Thorn saw 8 duck-billed dinosaurs with large tube-like crests rising above their heads. They drank and lifted their heads, honking mournfully. Directly ahead, he saw a lone stegosaurus with its curved back and its vertical rows of plates. The Triceratops herd moved slowly past the stegosaur, which paid no attention to them. And to the west, rising above a clump of trees, they saw a dozen long, graceful necks of apatosaurs, their bodies hidden by the foliage that they lazily ate. It was a tranquil scene, but it was a scene from another world. "Doc," Eddie said, "what is this place?" Site B. Sitting in the cars, they stared out over the plain. They watched the dinosaurs move slowly through the deep grass. They heard the soft cry of the duckbills. The separate herds moved peacefully beside the river. Eddie said, "So what are we saying? This is a place that got bypassed by evolution? One of those places where time stands still?" "Not at all," Malcolm said. "There's a perfectly rational explanation for what you are seeing, and we are going to—" From the dashboard there was a high-pitched beeping. On the GPS map a blue grid was overlaid with a flashing triangular point marked LEVN. "It's him," Eddie said. "We got the son of a bitch." "You're reading that?" Thorn said. "It's pretty weak." "It's fine. It's got enough signal strength to transmit the ID tab. That's Levine, all right. Looks like it's coming from the valley over there." He started the Explorer, and it lurched forward up the road. "Let's go," Eddie said. "I want to get the hell out of here." With the flick of a switch, Thorn turned on the electric motor for the trailer and heard the chug of the vacuum pump, the low whine of the automatic transmission. He put the trailer in gear and followed behind. The impenetrable jungle closed in around them again, close and hot. The trees overhead blocked nearly all the sunlight. As he drove, he heard the beeping become irregular. He glanced at the monitor, saw the flashing triangle was disappearing, then coming back again. "Are we losing him, Eddie?" Thorn said. "Doesn't matter if we do," Eddie said. "We've got a location on him now, and we can go right there. In fact, it should be just down this road here, right past this guardhouse or whatever it is, dead ahead." Thorn looked past the Explorer and saw a concrete structure and a tilting steel road barrier. It did indeed look like a guardhouse. It was in disrepair and overgrown with vines. They drove on, coming onto paved road. It was clear the foliage on either side had once been cut far back, 50 feet on either side. Pretty soon they came to a second guardhouse and a second checkpoint. They continued on another 100 yards, the road still curving slowly along the ridge. The surrounding foliage became sparser. Through gaps in the ferns, Thorn could see wooden outbuildings, all painted identical green. They seemed to be utility structures, perhaps sheds for equipment. He had the sense of entering a substantial complex. And then, suddenly, they rounded a curve and saw the entire complex spread out below them. It was about a half-mile away. Eddie said, "What the hell is that?" Thorn stared, astonished. In the center of the clearing he saw the flat roof of an enormous building. It covered several acres, stretching away into the distance. It was the size of 2 football fields. Beyond the vast roof was a large blocky building with a metal roof which had the functional look of a power plant. But if so, it was as big as the power plant for a small town. At the far end of the main building, Thorn saw loading docks and turnarounds for trucks. Over to the right, partially hidden in foliage, there were a series of small structures that looked like cottages. But from a distance, it was hard to be sure. Taken together, the whole complex had a utilitarian quality that reminded Thorne of an industrial site or a fabrication plant. He frowned, trying to put it together. "Do you know what this is?" Thorne said to Malcolm. "Yes," Malcolm said, nodding slowly. "It's what I suspected for some time now." "Yes?" "It's a manufacturing plant," Malcolm said. "It's a kind of factory." "But it's huge," Thorne said. "Yes," Malcolm said. "It had to be." Over the radio, Eddie said, "I'm still getting a reading from Levine, and guess what? It seems to be coming from that building." They drove past the covered front entrance to the main building beneath the sagging portico. The building was of modern design, concrete and glass, but the jungle had long ago grown up around it. Vines hung from the roof, panes of glass were broken, ferns sprouted between cracks in the concrete. Thorne said, "Eddie, got a reading?" Eddie said, "Yeah, inside. What do you want to do?" "Set up base camp in that field over there," Thorne said, pointing a half-mile to the left, where once, it seemed, there had been an extensive lawn. It was still an open clearing in the jungle. There would be sunlight for the photovoltaics. "Then we'll have a look around." Eddie parked his Explorer, turning it around to face back the way they had come. Thorne maneuvered the trailers alongside the car and cut the engine. He climbed out into the still, hot morning air. Malcolm got out and stood with him. Here, in the center of the island, it was completely silent, except for the buzz of insects. Eddie came over, slapping himself. "Great place, huh? No shortage of mosquitoes. You want to go get the son of a bitch now?" Eddie unclipped a receiver from his belt and cupped his hand over the display, trying to see it in the sunlight. "Still right over there." He pointed to the main building. "What do you say?" "Let's go get him," Thorne said. The three men turned, climbed into the Explorer, and leaving the trailers behind, drove in hot sunlight toward the giant, ruined building. Trailer. Inside the trailer, the sound of the car engine faded away, and there was silence. The dashboard glowed. The GPS map remained visible on the monitor, the flashing X marking their position. A small window in the monitor titled Active Systems indicated the battery charge, photovoltaic efficiency, and usage over the past 12 hours. The electronic readouts all glowed bright green. In the living section, where the kitchen and beds were located, the recirculating water supply in the sink gurgled softly. Then there was a thumping sound coming from the upper storage compartment, located near the ceiling. The thumping was repeated, and then there was silence. After a moment, a credit card appeared through the crack of the compartment door. The card slid upward, lifting the panel latch, unhooking it. The door swung open, and a white bundle of padding fell out, landing with a dull thud on the floor. The padding unrolled, and Arby Benton groaned, stretching his small body. "If I don't pee, I'm going to scream," he said, and he hurried on shaky legs into the tiny bathroom. He sighed in relief. It had been Kelly's idea for them to go, but she left it to Arby to figure out the details. And he had figured everything out perfectly, he thought, at least almost everything. Arby had correctly anticipated it would be freezing cold in the cargo plane and that they would have to bundle up. He'd stuffed their compartments with every blanket and sheet in the trailer. He'd anticipated they would be there at least 12 hours, and he put aside some cookies and bottles of water. In fact, he'd anticipated everything, except the fact that at the last minute, Eddie Carr would go through the trailer and latch all the storage compartments from the outside, locking them in so that for the next 12 hours he wouldn't be able to go to the bathroom. For 12 hours. He sighed again, his body relaxing. A steady stream of urine still flowed into the basin. No wonder. Agony. And he'd still be locked in there, he thought, if he hadn't finally figured out. Behind him, he heard muffled shouts. He flushed the toilet and went back, crouching down by the storage compartment beneath the bed. He quickly unlatched it, another padded bundle unrolled, and Kelly appeared beside him. "Hey, Kel," he said proudly, "we made it." "I have to go," she said, dashing. She pulled the door shut behind her. Arby said, "We did it. We're here. Just a minute, Arb, okay?" For the first time he looked out the window of the trailer. All around them was a grassy clearing, and beyond that the ferns and high trees of the jungle. And high above the tops of the trees he saw the curving black rock of the volcanic rim. So this was Isla Sorna, all right. All right. Kelly came out of the bathroom. "Oh, I thought I was going to die." She looked at him, gave him a high five. "By the way, how'd you get your door unlatched?" "Credit card," he said. She frowned. "You have a credit card?" "My parents gave it to me for emergencies," he said. "And I figured this was an emergency." He tried to make a joke out of it, to treat it lightly. Arby knew Kelly was sensitive about anything to do with money. She was always making comments about his clothes and things like that, and how he always had money for a taxi or a Coke at Larson's Deli after school, or whatever. Once he said to her that he didn't think money was so important, and she said, "Why would you?" in a funny voice, and ever since then he had tried to avoid the subject. Arby wasn't always clear about the right thing to do around people. Everyone treated him so weird anyway, because he was younger, of course, and because he was black, and because he was what the other kids called a brainer. He found himself engaged in a constant effort to be accepted, to blend in, except he couldn't. He wasn't white, he wasn't big, he wasn't good at sports, and he wasn't dumb. Most of his classes at school were so boring Arby could hardly stay awake in them. His teachers sometimes got annoyed with him, but what could he do? School was like a video played at super slow speed. You could glance at it once an hour and not miss anything. And when he was around the other kids, how could he be expected to show interest in TV shows like Melrose Place, or the San Francisco 49ers, or the Shaq's new commercial? He couldn't. That stuff wasn't important. But Arby had long ago discovered it was unpopular to say so. It was better to keep your mouth shut, because nobody understood him except Kelly. She seemed to know what he was talking about most of the time. And Dr. Levine. At least the school had an advanced placement track, which was moderately interesting to Arby. Not very interesting, of course, but better than the other classes. And when Dr. Levine had decided to teach the class, Arby had found himself excited by school for the first time in his life. In fact, "So this is Isla Sorna, huh?" Kelly said, looking out the window at the jungle. "Yeah," Arby said, "I guess so." "You know, when they stopped the car earlier," Kelly said, "could you hear what they were talking about?" "Not really, all the padding." "Me neither," Kelly said, "but they seemed pretty worked up about something." "Yeah, they did." "It sounded like they were talking about dinosaurs," Kelly said. "Did you hear anything like that?" Arby laughed, shaking his head. "No, Cal," he said, "because I thought they did." "Come on, Cal." "I thought Thorne said Triceratops." "Cal," he said, "dinosaurs have been extinct for 65 million years. I know that." He pointed out the window. "You see any dinosaurs out there?" Kelly didn't answer. She went to the other side of the trailer and looked out the opposite window. She saw Thorne, Malcolm, and Eddie disappearing into the main building. "They're going to be pretty annoyed when they find us," Arby said. "How do you think we should tell them?" "We can't let it be a surprise." "They'll be mad," he said. "So? What can they do about it?" Kelly said. "Maybe they'll send us back." "How? They can't." "Yeah, I guess." Arby shrugged, casually, but he was more troubled by this line of thought than he wanted to admit. This was all Kelly's idea. Arby had never liked to break the rules or to get into any kind of trouble. Whenever he had even had a mild reprimand from a teacher, he would get flushed and sweaty. And for the last 12 hours, he had been thinking about how Thorne and the others would react.
Look, Kelly said, the thing is we're here to help find our friend Dr. Levine, that's all. We've helped Dr. Thorne already. Yes. And we'll be able to help them again. Maybe. They need our help. Maybe, Arby said. He didn't feel convinced. Kelly said, I wonder what they have to eat here. She opened the refrigerator. You hungry? Starving, Arby said, suddenly aware that he was. So what do you want? What is there? He sat on the padded gray couch and stretched as he watched Kelly poke through the refrigerator. Come and look, she said, annoyed. I'm not your stupid housekeeper. Okay, take it easy. Well, you expect everybody to wait on you, she said. I do not, he said, getting quickly off the couch. You're such a brat, Arby. Hey, he said, what's the big deal? Take it easy. You nervous about something? No, I am not, she said. She took a wrapped sandwich out of the refrigerator. Standing beside her, he looked briefly inside, grabbed the first sandwich he saw. You don't want that, she said. Yes, I do. It's tuna salad. Arby hated tuna salad. He put it back quickly, looked around again. That's turkey on the left, she said, in the bun. He brought out a turkey sandwich. Thanks. No problem. Sitting on the couch, she opened her own sandwich, wolfed it down hungrily. Listen, at least I got us here, he said, unwrapping his own carefully. He folded the plastic neatly, set it aside. Yeah, you did, I admit it. You did that part all right. Arby ate his sandwich. He thought he had never tasted anything so good in his entire life. It was better even than his mother's turkey sandwiches. The thought of his mother gave him a pang. His mother was a gynecologist and very beautiful. She had a busy life and wasn't home very much, but whenever he saw her, she always seemed so peaceful. And Arby felt peaceful around her, too. They had a special relationship, the two of them. Even though lately she sometimes seemed uneasy about how much he knew. One night he had come into her study. She was going over some journal articles about progesterone levels and FSH. He looked over her shoulder at the columns of numbers and suggested that she might want to try a nonlinear equation to analyze the data. She gave him a funny look, a kind of separate look, thoughtful and distant from him, and at that moment he had felt... I'm getting another one, Kelly said, going back to the refrigerator. She came out with 2 sandwiches, one in each hand. You think there's enough? Who cares? I'm starving, she said, tearing off the wrapping on the first. Maybe we shouldn't eat. Arb, if you're going to worry like this, we should have stayed home. He decided that was right. He was surprised to see that he had somehow finished his own sandwich, so he took the other one Kelly offered him. Kelly ate and stared out the window. I wonder what that building is that they went into. It looks abandoned. Yeah, for years. Why would somebody build a big building here on some deserted island in Costa Rica? She said. Maybe they were doing something secret. Or dangerous, she said. Yeah, or that. The idea of danger was both titillating and unnerving. He felt far from home. I wonder what they were doing, she said. Still eating, she got up off the couch and went to look out the window. Sure is a big place. Huh, she said. That's weird. What is? Look out here. That building is all overgrown, like nobody's been there for years and years, and this field is all grown up, too. The grass is pretty high. Yes. But right down here, she said, pointing near the trailer, there's a clear path. Chewing, Arby came over and looked. She was right. Just a few yards from their trailer, the grass had been trampled down and was yellowed. In many places, bare earth showed through. It was a narrow but distinct trail coming in from the left, going off to the right across the open clearing. So, Kelly said, if nobody's been here for years, what made the trail? Has to be animals, he said. It was all he could think of. Must be a game trail. Like what animals? I don't know. Whatever's here, deer or something? I haven't seen any deer. He shrugged. Maybe goats. Wild goats like they have in Hawaii. The trail's too wide for deer or goats. Maybe there's a whole herd of wild goats. Too wide, Kelly said. She shrugged and turned away from the window. She went back to the refrigerator. I wonder if there's anything for dessert. Mention of dessert gave him a sudden thought. He went to the compartment above the bed, climbed up and poked around. What are you doing? She said. Checking my pack. For what? I think I forgot my toothbrush. So? I won't be able to brush my teeth. Arb, she said, who cares? But I always brush my teeth. Be daring, Kelly said. Live a little. Arby sighed. Maybe Dr. Thorne brought an extra one. He came back and sat down on the couch beside Kelly. She folded her arms across her chest and shook her head. No dessert? Nothing. Not even frozen yogurt. Adults, they never plan right. Yeah, that's true. Arby yawned. It was warm in the trailer. He felt sleepy. Lying huddled in that compartment for the last 12 hours, shivering and cramped, he hadn't slept at all. Now he was suddenly tired. He looked at Kelly, and she yawned too. Want to go outside? Wake us up? We should probably wait here, he said. If I do, I'm afraid I'll go to sleep, Kelly said. Arby shrugged. Sleep was overtaking him fast. He went back to the living compartment and crawled onto the mattress beside the window. Kelly followed him back. I'm not going to sleep, she said. Fine, Cal. His eyes were heavy. He realized he couldn't keep them open. But, she yawned again, maybe I'll just lie down for a minute. He saw her stretch out on the bed opposite him, and then his eyes closed, and he was immediately asleep. He dreamed he was back in the airplane, feeling the gentle rocking motion, hearing the deep rumble of the engines. He slept lightly, and at one moment woke up convinced that the trailer actually was rocking, and that there really was a low, rumbling sound coming from right outside the window. But almost immediately he was asleep again, and now he dreamed of dinosaurs. Kelly's dinosaurs, and in his light sleep there were two animals so huge that he could not see their heads through the window, only their thick, scaly legs as they thumped on the ground and walked past the trailer. But in his dream the second animal paused and bent over, and the big head peered in curiously through the window, and Arby realized that he was seeing the giant head of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, the great jaws working, the white teeth glinting in the sunlight. And in his dream he watched it all calmly and slept on. Interior. Two large swinging glass doors at the front of the main building led into a darkened lobby beyond. The glass was scratched and dirty, the chrome door handles pitted with corrosion. But it was clear that the dust, debris, and dead leaves in front of the doorway had been disturbed in twin arcs. "Somebody's opened these doors recently," Eddie said. "Yes," Thorne said. "Somebody wearing a solo boots." He opened the door. "Shall we?" They stepped into the building. Inside the air was hot and still and fetid. The lobby was small and unimpressive. A reception counter directly ahead was once covered with gray fabric, now overgrown with a dark, lichen-like growth. On the wall behind was a row of chrome letters that said, "We make the future." But the words were obscured by a tangle of vines. Mushrooms and fungi sprouted from the carpet. Over to the right they saw a waiting area with a coffee table and two long couches. One of the couches was speckled with crusty brown mold. The other had been covered with a plastic tarp. Next to this couch was what was left of Levine's green backpack, with several deep tears in the fabric. On the coffee table were two empty plastic Evian bottles, a satellite phone, a pair of muddy hiking shorts, and several crumpled candy bar wrappers. A bright green snake slithered quickly away as they approached.
"So this is an InGen building,"
Thorne said, looking at the wall sign. "Absolutely," Malcolm said. Eddie bent over Levine's backpack, ran his fingers along the tears in the fabric. As he did so, a large rat jumped out from the pack. "Jesus!" The rat scurried away, squeaking. Eddie looked cautiously inside the pack. "I don't think anybody's going to want the rest of these candy bars," he said. He turned to the pile of clothes. "You getting a reading from this?" Some of the expedition clothes had micro-sensors sewn into them. "No," Thorne said, moving his hand monitor. "I have a reading, but it seems to be coming from there." He pointed to a set of metal doors beyond the reception desk, leading into the building beyond. The doors had once been bolted shut and locked with rusted padlocks, but the padlocks now lay on the floor, broken open. "Let's go get him," Eddie said, heading for the doors. "What kind of a snake do you think that was?"
"I don't know."
"Was it poisonous?"
"I don't know."
The doors opened with a loud creak. The three men found themselves in a blank corridor, with broken windows along one wall and dried leaves and debris on the floor. The walls were dirty and darkly stained in several places with what looked like blood. They saw several doors opening off the corridor. None appeared to be locked. Plants were growing up through rips in the carpeted floor. Near the windows, where it was light, vines grew thickly over the cracked walls. More vines hung down from the ceiling. Thorne and the others headed down the hallway. There was no sound except their feet crunching on the dried leaves.
"Getting stronger,"
Thorne said, looking at his monitor.
"He must be somewhere in this building."
Thorne opened the first door he came to and saw a plain office, a desk and chair, a map of the island on the wall. A desk lamp toppled over from the weight of tangled vines. A computer monitor with a film of mold. At the far end of the room, light filtered through a grimy window. They went down the hall to the second door and saw an almost identical office, similar desk and chair, similar window at the far side of the room. Eddie grunted. "Looks like we're in an office building," he said. Thorne went on. He opened the third door, and then the fourth. More offices. Thorne opened the fifth door and paused. He was in a conference room, dirty with leaves and debris. There were animal droppings on the long wooden table in the center of the room. The window on the far side was dusty. Thorne was drawn to a large map which covered one whole wall of the conference room. There were pushpins of various colors stuck in the map. Eddie came in and frowned. Beneath the map was a chest of drawers. Thorne tried to open them, but they were all locked. Malcolm walked slowly into the room, looking around, taking it in. "What's this map mean?" Eddie said. "You have any idea what the pins are?" Malcolm glanced at it. 20 pins in 4 different colors. 5 pins of each color, arranged in a pentagon or any way a 5-pronged pattern of some kind, going to all parts of the island. I'd say it looks like a network." "Didn't Arby say there was a network on this island?"
"Yes, he did."
"Interesting."
"Well, never mind that now," Thorne said.
He went back into the hallway again, following the signal from his hand unit. Malcolm closed the door behind them, and they continued on. They saw more offices, but no longer opened the doors. They followed the signal from Levine. At the end of the corridor was a pair of sliding glass doors marked "No Admittance, Authorized Personnel Only." Thorne peered through the glass, but he could not see much beyond. He had the sense of a large space and complex machinery, but the glass was dusty and streaked with grime. It was difficult to see. Thorne said to Malcolm,
"You really think you know what this building was for?"
"I know exactly what it was for," Malcolm said. "It's a manufacturing plant for dinosaurs."
"Why?" Eddie said. "Would anybody want that?"
"Nobody would," Malcolm said. "That's why they kept it a secret."
"I don't get it," Eddie said.
Malcolm smiled. "Long story," he said. He slipped his hands between the doors and tried to pull them open, but they remained shut fast. He grunted, straining with effort. And then, suddenly, with a metallic screech, they slid apart. They stepped into the darkness beyond. Their flashlights shone down an inky corridor as they moved forward. To understand this place, you have to go back 10 years to a man named John Hammond and an animal called the quagga. "The what?" "The quagga," Malcolm said, "is an African mammal, rather like a zebra. It became extinct in the last century. But in the 1980s, somebody used the latest DNA extraction techniques on a piece of quagga hide and recovered a lot of DNA, so much DNA that people began to talk about bringing the quagga back to life. And if you could bring the quagga back to life, why not other extinct animals? The dodo, the saber-toothed tiger, or even a dinosaur." "Where could you get dinosaur DNA?" Thorne said. "Actually," Malcolm said, "paleontologists have been finding fragments of dinosaur DNA for years. They never said much about it because they never had enough material to use it as a classification tool, so it didn't seem to have any value. It was just a curiosity." "But to recreate an animal, you'd need more than DNA fragments," Thorne said. "You'd need the whole strand." "That's right," Malcolm said. "And the man who figured out how to get it was a venture capitalist named John Hammond. He reasoned that when dinosaurs were alive, insects probably bit them and sucked their blood, just as insects do today. And some of those insects would afterward land on a branch and be trapped in sticky sap. And some of that sap would harden into amber. Hammond decided that if you drilled into insects preserved in amber and extracted the stomach contents, you would eventually get some dino DNA. And did he? Yes, he did. And he started InGen to develop this discovery. Hammond was a hustler, and his true talent was raising money. He figured out how to get enough money to do the research to go from a DNA strand to a living animal. Sources of funding weren't immediately apparent, because although it would be exciting to recreate a dinosaur, it wasn't exactly a cure for cancer. So he decided to make a tourist attraction. He planned to recover the cost of the dinosaurs by putting them in a kind of zoo or theme park where he would charge admission. "Are you joking?" Thorne said. "No. Hammond actually did it. He built his park on an island called Isla Nublar, north of here, and he planned to open it to the public in late 1989. I went to see the place myself shortly before it was scheduled to open. But it turned out Hammond had problems," Malcolm said. "The park systems broke down, and the dinosaurs got free. Some visitors were killed. Afterward, the park and all its dinosaurs were destroyed." They passed a window where they could look out over the plain at the herds of dinosaurs browsing by the river. Thorne said, "If they were all destroyed, what's this island?" "This island," Malcolm said, "is Hammond's dirty little secret. It's the dark side of his park." They continued down the corridor. "You see," Malcolm said, "visitors to Hammond's park at Isla Nublar were shown a very impressive genetics lab with computers and gene sequencers and all sorts of facilities for hatching and growing young dinosaurs. Visitors were told that the dinosaurs were created right there at the park, and the laboratory tour was entirely convincing. But actually, Hammond's tour skipped several steps in the process. In one room he showed you dinosaur DNA being extracted. In the next room he showed you eggs about to hatch. It was very dramatic, but how had he gotten from DNA to a viable embryo? You never saw that critical step. It was just presented as having happened between rooms. The fact was, Hammond's whole show was too good to be true. For example, he had a hatchery where the little dinosaurs pecked their way out of the eggs, while you watched in amazement. But there were never any problems in the hatchery. No stillbirths, no deformities, no difficulties of any sort. In Hammond's presentation, this dazzling technology was carried off without a hitch. And if you think about it, it couldn't possibly be true. Hammond was claiming to manufacture extinct animals using cutting-edge technology, but with any new manufacturing technology, initial yields are low, on the order of 1% or less. So in fact, Hammond must have been growing thousands of dinosaur embryos to get a single live birth. That implied a giant industrial operation, not the spotless little laboratory we were shown.
"You mean this place?"
Thorne said. "Yes. Here, on another island, in secret, away from public scrutiny. Hammond was free to do his research and deal with the unpleasant truth behind his beautiful little park. Hammond's little genetic zoo was a showcase. But this island was the real thing. This is where the dinosaurs were made." "If the animals at the zoo were destroyed," Eddie said, "how come they weren't destroyed on this island, too?" "A critical question," Malcolm said. "We should know the answer in a few minutes." He shone his light down the tunnel. It glinted off glass walls. "Because if I am not mistaken," he said, "the first of the manufacturing bays is just ahead." Arby. Arby awoke, sitting upright in bed, blinking his eyes in the morning light that streamed in through the trailer windows. In the next bunk, Kelly was still asleep, snoring loudly. He looked out the window at the entrance to the big building and saw that the adults were gone. The Explorer was standing by the entrance, but there was no one inside the car. Their trailer sat isolated in the clearing of tall grass. Arby felt entirely alone, frighteningly alone, and a sudden sense of panic made his heart pound. He never should have come here, he thought. The whole idea was stupid. And worst of all, it had been his plan, the way they had huddled together in the trailer and then had gone back to Thorne's office. And Kelly had talked to Thorne so that Arby could steal the key. The way he had set up a delayed radio message to be transmitted to Thorne so that Thorne would think they were still in Woodside. Arby had felt very clever at the time, but now he regretted it all. He decided that he had to call Thorne immediately. He had to turn himself in. He was filled with an overwhelming desire to confess. He needed to hear somebody's voice. That was the truth. He walked from the back of the trailer, where Kelly was sleeping, to the front and turned on the ignition key in the dashboard. He picked up the radio handset and said, "This is Arby. Is anybody there? Over. This is Arby." But nobody answered. After a moment, he looked at the dashboard systems monitor, which registered all the systems that were operative. He didn't see anything about communications. It occurred to him that the communications system was probably hooked into the computer. He decided to turn the computer on. So he went back to the middle of the trailer, unstrapped the keyboard, plugged it in, and turned the computer on. There was a menu screen that said Thorne Field Systems, and underneath that a listing of subsystems inside the trailer. One of them was radio communications, so he clicked on that and turned it on. The computer screen showed a scrambled hash of static. At the bottom was a command line that read, "Multiple frequency inputs received. Do you want to auto-tune?" Arby didn't know what that meant, but he was fearless around computers. Auto-tune sounded interesting. Without hesitation, he typed, "Yes." The static scramble remained on the screen while numbers rolled at the bottom. He guessed he was seeing frequencies in megahertz, but he didn't really know. And then, suddenly, the screen went blank, except for a single flashing word in the upper left corner. "Log in." He paused, frowning. That was odd. Apparently he was required to log into the trailer's computer system. That meant he would need a password. He tried Thorne. Nothing happened. He waited a moment, then tried Thorne's initials, J.T. Nothing. Levine. Nothing. Thorne Field Systems. Nothing. TFS. Nothing. Field. Nothing. User. Nothing. Well, he thought, at least the system hadn't dumped him out. Most networks logged you off after 3 wrong tries. But apparently Thorne hadn't designed any security features into this one. Harvey would never have made it this way. The system was too patient and helpful. He tried help. The cursor moved to another line. There was a pause. The drive's word. Action, he said, rubbing his hands. Laboratory. As Thorne's eyes adjusted to the low light, he saw they were standing inside an enormous space consisting of row after row of rectangular stainless steel boxes, each fitted with a tangled maze of plastic tubing. Everything was dusty. Many of the boxes were knocked over. "The first rows," Malcolm said, "are Nishihara gene sequencers, and beyond are the automatic DNA synthesizers." "It's a factory," Eddie said. "It's like agribusiness or something." "Yes, it is." At the corner of the room was a printer with some loose sheets of yellowing paper lying beside it. Malcolm picked up one and glanced at it. "It's a reference to a computer database," Malcolm said, "for some dinosaur blood factor, something to do with red cells."
"And is that the sequence?"
"No," Malcolm said. He started shuffling through the papers. "No, the sequence should be a series of nucleotides. Here." He picked up another sheet of paper.
"Does this have something to do with why the animals survived?" Thorne said.
"I'm not sure," Malcolm said. "Was this sheet related to the final days of the manufacturing facility, or was it just something that a worker printed out years ago and somehow left behind?" He looked around by the printer and found a shelved stack of sheets. Pulling them out, he discovered that they were memos. They were on faded blue paper, and they were all brief. From CC/D-P Jenkins to H. Wu. Excess dopamine in alpha-5 means D1 receptor still not functioning with desired avidity. To minimize aggressive behavior in finished orgs, must try alternate genetic backgrounds. We need to start this today. And again, from CC/D to H. Wu/SUP. Isolated glycogen synthase kinase 3 from Xenopus may work better than mammalian GSK-3 alpha-beta currently in use. Anticipate more robust establishment of dorsoventral polarity and less early embryo wastage. Agree? Malcolm looked at the next one. From Bacchus to H. Wu. Short protein fragments may be acting as prions. Sourcing doubtful, but suggest halt all exogenous protein for carnivorous orgs until origin is cleared up. Disease cannot continue! ! Thorne looked over his shoulder.
"Seems like they had problems," he said.
"Undoubtedly they did," Malcolm said. "It would be impossible not to have them. But the question is—" He drifted off, staring at the next memo, which was longer. InGen Production Update 10-10-88 from Laurie Russo to all personnel, subject low production yields. Recent episodes of wastage of successful live births in the period 24 to 72 hours post-hatching have been traced to contamination from Escherichia coli bacteria. These have cut production yields by 60% and arise from inadequate sterile precautions by floor personnel, principally during Process H, Egg Maintenance Phase, Hormone Enhancement 2G/H. Chimera swing arms have been replaced and re-sleeved on robots 5A and 7D, but needle replacement must still be done daily in accordance with sterile conditions. General Manual, Guideline 5-9. During the next production cycle, 1012 to 1026, we will sacrifice every 10th egg at H step to test for contamination. Begin set-asides at once. Report all errors. Stop the line whenever necessary until this is cleared up. They had problems with infection and contamination of the production line, Malcolm said. And maybe other sources of contamination as well. Look at this. He handed Thorne the next memo. InGen Production Update 12-1888 from H. Wu to all personnel. Subject DX. Tag and release. Live births will be fitted with the new Grumbach field tags at the earliest viable interval. Formula or other feeding within the laboratory confines will no longer be done. The release program is now fully operational, and tracking networks are activated to monitor. Thorne said, "Does this mean what I think it means?" "Yes," Malcolm said. "They were having trouble keeping the newborn animals alive, so they tagged them and released them." "And kept track of them on some kind of network?" "Yes, I think so." "They set dinosaurs loose on this island?" Eddie said. "They must have been crazy." "Desperate is more like it," Malcolm said. "Just imagine, here's this huge, expensive, high-tech process, and in the end, the animals are getting sick and dying. Hammond must have been furious, so they decided to get the animals out of the laboratory and into the wild." "But why didn't they find the cause of the sickness? Why didn't they—" "Commercial process," Malcolm said. "It's all about results. And I'm sure they thought they were keeping track of the animals. They could get them back any time they wanted. And don't forget, it must have worked. They must have put the animals into the field, then collected them after a while, when they were older, and shipped them to Hammond's zoo." "But not all of them." "We don't know everything yet," Malcolm said. "We don't know what happened here." They went through the next doorway and found themselves in a small, bare room with a central bench and lockers on the walls. Signs said, "Observe sterile precautions" and "Maintain SK4 standards." At the end of the room was a cabinet with stacks of yellowing gowns and caps. Eddie said, "It's a changing room." "Looks like it," Malcolm said. He opened a locker. It was empty except for a pair of men's shoes. He opened several other lockers. They were all empty. Inside one, a sheet of paper was taped. "Safety is everybody's business. Report genetic anomalies. Dispose of bio-waste properly. Halt the spread of DX now." "What's DX?" Eddie said. "I think," Malcolm said, "it's the name for this mysterious disease." At the far end of the changing room were two doors. The right-hand door was pneumatic, operated by a rubber foot panel set in the floor, but that door was locked, so they went through the left door, which opened freely. They found themselves in a long corridor with floor-to-ceiling glass panels along the right wall. The glass was scratched and dirty, but they peered through it into the room beyond, which was unlike anything Thorne had ever seen. The space was vast, the size of a football field. Conveyor belts crisscrossed the room at two levels, one very high, the other at waist level.
At various stations around the room, clusters of large machinery with intricate tubing and swing arms stood beside the belts. Thorne shone his light on the conveyor belts. "An assembly line," he said. "But it looks untouched, like it's still ready to go," Malcolm said. "There are a couple of plants growing through the floor over there, but overall remarkably clean." "Too clean," Eddie said. Thorne shrugged. "If it's a clean room environment, then it's probably air-sealed," he said. "I guess it just stayed the way it was years ago." Eddie shook his head. "For years? Doc, I don't think so." "Then what do you think explains it?" Malcolm frowned, peering through the glass. How was it possible for a room this size to remain clean after so many years? It didn't make any— "Hey!" Eddie said. Malcolm saw it too. It was in the far corner of the room, a small blue box halfway up the wall, cables running into it. It was obviously some kind of electrical junction box. Mounted on the box was a tiny red light. It was glowing. "This place has power!" Thorne moved close to the glass, looking through with them. "That's impossible. It must be some kind of stored charge or a battery." "After 5 years, no battery can last that long," Eddie said. "I'm telling you, Doc, this place has power." Arby stared at the monitor as white lettering slowly printed across the screen. "Are you first-time user of the network?" He typed yes. There was another pause. He waited. More letters slowly appeared. "Your full name." He typed in his name. "Do you want a password issued to you?" You're kidding, he thought. This was going to be a snap. It was almost disappointing. He really thought Dr. Thorne would have been more clever. He typed yes. After a moment, "Your new password is VIG/&*849/. Please make a note of it." Sure thing, Arby thought. You bet I will. There was no paper on the desk in front of him. He patted his pockets, found a scrap of paper, and wrote it down. "Please re-enter your password now." He typed in the series of characters and numbers. There was another pause, and then more printing appeared across the screen. The speed of the printing was oddly slow and halting at times. After all this time, maybe the system wasn't working very— "Thank you. Password confirmed." The screen flashed and suddenly turned dark blue. There was an electronic chime, and then Arby's jaw dropped open as he stared at the screen, which read, "International Genetic Technologies, Site B, Local Node Network Services." It didn't make any sense. How could there be a Site B network? InGen had closed Site B years ago. Arby had already read the documents. And InGen was out of business, long since bankrupt. What network, he thought. And how had he managed to get on it? The trailer wasn't connected to anything. There were no cables or anything, so it must be a radio network already on the island. Somehow, he'd managed to log on to it. But how could it exist? A radio network needed power, and there was no power here. Arby waited. Nothing happened. The words just sat there on the screen. He waited for a menu to come up, but one never did. Arby began to think that perhaps the system was defunct, or hung up. Maybe it just let you log on, and then nothing happened after that. Or maybe he thought he was supposed to do something. He did the simplest thing, which was to press return. He saw remote network services available. Current work files, research, production, field rec, maintenance, administration. Last modified, 10-2-89, 10-5-89, 10-9-89, 11-12-89, 11-11-89.
stored data files. Video network. So it really was an old system. Files hadn't been modified for years. Wondering if it still worked, he clicked on Video Network. And to his amazement, he saw the screen begin to fill with tiny video images. There were 15 in all, crowding the screen, showing views of various parts of the island. Most of the cameras seemed to be mounted high up, in trees or something, and they showed... He stared. They showed dinosaurs. He squinted. It wasn't possible. These were movies or something, he was saying, because in one corner he saw a herd of triceratops. In an adjacent square, some green lizard-looking things in high grass with just their heads sticking up. In another, a single stegosaurus ambling along. They must be movies, he thought. The Dinosaur Channel. But then, in another image, Arby saw the two connected trailers standing in the clearing. He could see the black photovoltaic panels glistening on the roof. He almost imagined he could see himself through the window of the trailer. "Oh, my God," he thought. And in another image, he saw Thorne and Malcolm and Eddie get quickly into the green Explorer and drive around the back of the laboratory, and he realized, with a shock, the pictures were all real. Power. They drove the Explorer to the back of the main building, heading for the power station. On the way, they passed a little village to their right. Thorne saw 6 plantation-style cottages and a larger building marked Manager's Residence. It was clear that the cottages had once been nicely landscaped, but they were now overgrown, partially retaken by the jungle. In the center of the complex, they saw a tennis court, a drained swimming pool, a small gas pump in front of what looked like a little general store. Thorne said, "I wonder how many people they had here." Eddie said, "How do you know they're all gone?" "What do you mean?" "Doc, they have power. After all these years, there has to be an explanation for it." Eddie steered the car around the back of the loading bays and drove toward the power station directly ahead. The power station was a windowless, featureless concrete blockhouse marked only by a corrugated steel rim for ventilation around the top. The steel vents were long since rusted a uniform brown with flecks of yellow. Eddie drove the car around the block looking for a door. He found it at the back. It was a heavy steel door with a peeling, painted sign that said, "Caution, high voltage, do not enter." Eddie jumped out of the car, and the others followed. Thorne sniffed the air. "Sulfur," he said. "Very strong," Malcolm said, nodding. Eddie tugged at the door. "Guys, I got a feeling—" The door opened suddenly with a clang, banging against the concrete wall. Eddie peered into darkness inside. Thorne saw a dense maze of pipes, a trickle of steam coming out of the floor. The room was extremely hot. There was a loud, constant whirring sound. Eddie said, "I'll be damned." He walked forward, looking at the gauges, many of which were unreadable, the glass thickly coated with yellow. The joints of the pipes were also rimmed with yellow crust. Eddie wiped away some of the crust with his finger. "Amazing," he said. "Sulfur?" "Yeah, sulfur. Amazing." He turned toward the source of the sound, saw a large circular vent, a turbine inside. The turbine blades, spinning rapidly, were dull yellow. "And that's sulfur, too?" Thorne said. "No," Eddie said. "That must be gold. Those turbine blades are gold alloy." "Gold?" "Yeah, it would have to be very inert." He turned to Thorne. "You realize what all this is? It's incredible. So compact and efficient. Nobody has figured out how to do this. The technology is—" "You're saying it's geothermal?" Malcolm said. "That's right," Eddie said. "They've tapped a heat source here, probably gas or steam, which is piped up through the floor over there. Then the heat is used to boil water in a closed cycle, that's the network of pipes up there, and turn the turbine there, which makes electric power. Whatever the heat source, geothermal's almost always corrosive as hell. Most places, maintenance is brutal, but this plant still works. Amazing. Along one wall was a main panel which distributed power to the entire laboratory complex. The panel was flecked with mold and dented in several spots. "Doesn't look like anybody's been in here in years," he said, "and a lot of the power grid is dead, but the plant itself is still going. Incredible." Thorne coughed in the sulphurous air and walked back into the sunlight. He looked up at the rear of the laboratory. One of the loading bays seemed in good shape, but the other had collapsed. The glass at the rear of the building was shattered. Malcolm came to stand beside him. "I wonder if an animal hit the building." "You think an animal could do that much damage?" Malcolm nodded. "Some of these dinosaurs weigh 40-50 tons. A single animal has the mass of a whole herd of elephants. That could easily be damage from an animal, yes. You notice that path running there? That's a game trail going past the loading bays and down the hill. It could have been animals, yes." Thorne said, "Didn't they think of that when they released the animals in the first place?" "Oh, I'm sure they just planned to release them for a few weeks or months, then round them up when they were still juvenile. I doubt they ever thought they—" They were interrupted by a crackling electrical hiss, like static. It was coming from inside the Explorer. Behind them, Eddie hurried toward the car with a worried look. "I knew it," Eddie said. "Our communications module is frying. I knew we should have put in the other one." He opened the door to the Explorer and climbed in the passenger side, picked up the handset, pressed the automatic tuner. Through the windshield he saw Thorne and Malcolm coming back toward the car. And then the transmission locked. "Into the car," said a scratchy voice. "Who is this?" "Dr. Thorne, Dr. Malcolm, get in the car." As Thorne arrived, Eddie said, "Doc, it's that damn kid." "What?" Thorne said. "It's Arby." Over the radio, Arby was saying, "Get in the car, I can see it coming." "What's he talking about?" Thorne said, frowning. "He's not here, is he? Is he on this island?" The radio crackled. "Yes, I'm here, Dr. Thorne." "But how the hell did he—" "Dr. Thorne, get in the car." Thorne turned purple with anger. He bunched his fists. "How did that little son of a bitch manage to do this?" He grabbed the handset from Eddie. "Arby, goddammit, it's coming!" Eddie said. "What's he talking about? He sounds completely hysterical." "I can see it on the television, Dr. Thorne." Malcolm looked around at the jungle. "Maybe we should get in the car," he said quietly. "What does he mean, television?" Thorne said. He was furious. Eddie said, "I don't know, Doc, but if he's got a feed in the trailer, we can see it too." He flicked on the dashboard monitor. He watched as the screen glowed to life. "That damn kid," Thorne said. "I'm going to wring his neck." "I thought you liked that kid," Malcolm said. "I do, but—" "Chaos at work," Malcolm said, shaking his head. Eddie was looking at the monitor. "Oh, shit," he said. On the tiny dashboard monitor, they had a view looking straight down at the powerful body of a Tyrannosaurus Rex as it moved up the game trail toward them. Its skin was a mottled reddish-brown, the color of dried blood. In dappled sunlight, they could clearly see the powerful muscles of its haunches. The animal moved quickly, without any sign of fear or hesitation. Staring, Thorne said, "Everybody in the car." The men climbed hurriedly in. On the monitor, the Tyrannosaur moved out of view of the camera. But sitting in the Explorer, they could hear it coming. The earth was shaking beneath them, swaying the car slightly. Thorne said, "Ian, what do you think we should do?" Malcolm didn't answer. He was frozen, staring forward, eyes blank. "Ian?" Thorne said. The radio clicked. Arby said, "Dr. Thorne, I've lost him on the monitor. Can you see him yet?" "Jesus," Eddie said. With astonishing speed, the Tyrannosaurus Rex burst into view, emerging from the foliage to the right of the Explorer. The animal was immense, the size of a 2-story building, its head rising high above them, out of sight. Yet for such a large creature, it moved with incredible speed and agility. Thorne stared in stunned silence, waiting to see what would happen. He felt the car vibrate with each thundering footstep. Eddie moaned softly. But the Tyrannosaur ignored them. Continuing at the same rapid pace, it moved swiftly past the front of the Explorer. They hardly had a chance to see it before its big head and body disappeared into the foliage to the left. Now they saw only the thick, counterbalancing tail, some 7 feet in the air, swinging back and forth with each footstep as the animal moved on. So fast, Thorne thought. Fast! The giant animal had emerged, blocked their vision, and then was gone again. He was not accustomed to seeing something that big move so fast. Now there was only the tip of the tail swinging back and forth as the animal hurried away. Then the tail banged against the front of the Explorer with a loud, metallic clang, and the Tyrannosaur stopped. They heard a low, uncertain growl from the jungle. The tail swung back and forth in the air again, more tentatively. Soon enough the tail brushed lightly against the radiator a second time. Now they saw the foliage to the left rustling and bending, and the tail was gone. Because the Tyrannosaur, Thorne realized, was coming back. Re-emerging from the jungle, it moved toward the car until it was standing directly in front of them. It growled again, a deep, rumbling sound, and turned its head slightly from side to side to look at this strange new object. Then it bent over, and Thorne could see that the Tyrannosaur had something in its mouth. He saw the legs of a creature dangling on both sides of the jaws. Flies buzzed in a thick cloud around the Tyrannosaur's head. Eddie moaned. "Oh, fuck." "Quiet," Thorne whispered. The Tyrannosaurus snorted and looked at the car. It bent lower and sniffed repeatedly, moving its head slightly to the left and right with each inhalation. Thorne realized it was smelling the radiator. It moved laterally and sniffed the tires. Then it lifted its huge head slowly until its eyes rose above the surface of the hood. It stared at them through the windshield. Its eyes blinked. The gaze was cold and reptilian. Thorne had the distinct impression that the Tyrannosaur was looking at them. Its eyes shifted from one person to the next. With its blunt nose, it pushed at the side of the car, rocking it slightly, as if testing its weight, measuring it as an opponent. Thorne gripped the steering wheel tightly and held his breath. And then, abruptly, the Tyrannosaur stepped away and walked to the front of the car. It turned its back on them, lifting its big tail high. The Tyrannosaur backed up toward them. They heard the tail scraping across the roof of the car. The rear haunches came closer. And then the Tyrannosaur sat down on the hood, tilting the vehicle, pushing the bumper into the ground with its enormous weight. At first it did not move, but simply sat there. Then, after a moment, it began to wriggle its hips back and forth in a quick motion, making the metal squeak. "What the hell?" Eddie said. The Tyrannosaur stood again. The car sprang back up, and Thorne saw thick white paste smeared across the hood. The Tyrannosaur immediately moved away, heading down the game trail, disappearing into the jungle. Behind them, they saw it emerge into the open again, stalk across the open compound. It lumbered behind the convenience store, passed between two of the cottages, and then disappeared from sight again. Thorne glanced at Eddie, who jerked his head toward Malcolm. Malcolm had not turned to watch the departing Tyrannosaur. He was still staring forward, his body tense. "Ian?" Thorne said. He touched him on the shoulder. Malcolm said, "Is he gone?" "Yes, he's gone." Ian Malcolm's body relaxed, his shoulders dropping. He exhaled slowly.
His head sagged to his chest. He took a deep breath and raised his head again. "You've got to admit," he said, "you don't see that every day." "Are you okay?" Thorne said. "Yeah, sure, I'm fine." He put his hand on his chest, feeling his heart. "Of course I'm fine. After all, that was just a small one." "Small?" Eddie said. "You call that thing small?" "Yes, for a tyrannosaur. Females are quite a bit larger. There's sexual dimorphism in tyrannosaurs. The females are bigger than the males, and it's generally thought they did most of the hunting. But we may find that out for ourselves." "Wait a minute," Eddie said. "What makes you so sure he was a male?" Malcolm pointed to the hood of the car, where the white paste now gave off a pungent odor. "He scent-marked territory." "So maybe females can also mark—" "Very likely they can," Malcolm said, "but anal scent glands are found only among males. And you saw how he did it." Eddie stared unhappily at the hood. "I hope we can get that stuff off," he said. "I brought some solvents, but I wasn't expecting, dino musk." The radio clicked. "Dr. Thorne?" Arby said. "Dr. Thorne, is everything all right?" "Yes, Arby, thanks to you," he said. "Then why are you waiting?" "Dr. Thorne? Didn't you see Dr. Levine?" "Not yet, no." Thorne reached for his sensor unit, but it had fallen to the floor. He bent over and picked it up. Levine's coordinates had changed. "He's moving." "I know he's moving. Dr. Thorne?" "Yes, Arby," Thorne said, and then he said, "Wait a minute. How do you know he's moving?" "Because I can see him," Arby said. "He's riding a bicycle." Kelly came into the front of the trailer, yawning and pushing her hair back from her face. "Who are you talking to, Arb?" She stared at the monitor and said, "Hey, pretty neat." "I got onto the Site B network," he said. "What network?" "It's a radio LAN, Kel. For some reason it's still up." "Is that right? But how did—" "Kids," Thorne said over the radio, "if you don't mind, we're looking for Levine." Arby picked up the handset. "He's riding a bicycle down a path in the jungle. It's pretty steep and narrow. I think he's following the same path as a tyrannosaur," Kelly said. "As the what?" Thorne put the car in gear, driving away from the power station toward the worker compound. He went past the gas station and then between the cottages. He followed the same path the tyrannosaur had taken. The game trail was fairly wide, easy to follow. "We shouldn't have those kids here," Malcolm said gloomily. "It's not safe." "Not much we can do about it now," Thorne said. He clicked the radio. "Arby, do you see Levine now?" The car bounced through what had once been a flower bed and around the back of the manager's residence. It was a large two-story building built in a tropical colonial style with hardwood balconies all around the upper floor. Like the other houses, it was overgrown. The radio clicked. "Yes, Dr. Thorne, I see him." "Where is he?" "He's following the tyrannosaur on his bicycle." "Following the tyrannosaur," Malcolm sighed. "I should never have gotten involved with him." "We all agree on that," Thorne said. He accelerated, driving past a section of broken stone wall which seemed to mark the outer perimeter of the compound. The car plunged on into jungle, following the game trail. Over the radio, Arby said, "Do you see him yet?" "Not yet." The trail became progressively narrower, twisting as it ran down the hillside. They came around a curve and suddenly saw a fallen tree blocking the path. The tree had been denuded in the center, its branches stripped and broken, presumably because large animals had repeatedly stepped over it. Thorne braked to a stop in front of the tree. He got out and walked around to the back of the Explorer. "Doc," Eddie said, "let me do it." "No," Thorne said. "If anything happens, you're the only one who can repair the equipment. You're more important, especially now that we have the kids." Standing behind the car, Thorne lifted the motorcycle off the carrier hooks. He swung it down, checked the battery charge, and rolled it to the front of the car. He said to Malcolm, "Give me that rifle," and slung the rifle around his shoulder. Thorne took a headset from the dashboard and put it over his head.
He clipped the battery pack to his belt, placed the microphone alongside his cheek. "You two go back to the trailer," Thorne said. "Take care of the kids." "But, Doc," Eddie began. "Just do it," Thorne said, and lifted the motorcycle over the fallen tree. He set it down on the other side and climbed over himself. Then he saw the same pungent, pale secretions on the trunk. It had smeared on his hands. He glanced back at Malcolm questioningly. "Marking territory," Malcolm said. "Great," Thorne said. "Just great." He wiped his hands on his trousers. Then he got on the motorcycle and drove off. Foliage slapped at Thorne's shoulders and legs as he drove down the game trail, following the tyrannosaur. The animal was somewhere up ahead, but he couldn't see it. He was driving fast. The radio headset crackled. Arby said, "Dr. Thorne, I can see you now." "Okay," Thorne said. It crackled again. "But I can't see Dr. Levine anymore," Arby said. He sounded worried. The electric motorcycle made hardly any noise, particularly going downhill. Up ahead, the game trail divided in two. Thorne stopped, leaned over the bike, looking at the muddy path. He saw the footprints of the tyrannosaur going off to the left, and he saw the thin line of the bicycle tires, also going off to the left. He took the left fork, but now he drove more slowly. 10 yards ahead, Thorne passed the partially eaten leg of a creature which lay at the side of the path. The leg was old. It was crawling with white maggots and flies. In the morning heat, the sharp smell was nauseating. He continued, but soon saw the skull of a large animal, some of the flesh and green skin still adhering to the bone. It, too, was covered with flies. Speaking into the microphone, he said, "I'm passing some partial carcasses." The radio crackled. Now he heard Malcolm say, "I was afraid of that." "Afraid of what?" "There may be a nest," Malcolm said. "Did you notice the carcass that the tyrannosaur had in its jaws? It was scavenged, but he hadn't eaten it. There's a good chance he was taking the food home, to a nest." "A tyrannosaur nest," Thorne said. "I'd be cautious," Malcolm said. Thorne slipped the bike into neutral and rolled the rest of the way down the hill. When the ground leveled out, he climbed off the motorcycle. He could feel the earth vibrate beneath his feet, and from the bushes ahead he heard a deep rumbling sound like the purr of a large jungle cat. Thorne looked around. He didn't see any sign of Levine's bicycle. Thorne unshouldered the rifle and gripped it in sweating hands. He heard the purring growl again, rising and falling. There was something odd about the sound. It took Thorne a moment to realize what it was. It came from more than one source, more than one big animal purring beyond the foliage directly ahead. Thorne bent over, picked up a handful of grass, and released it in the air. The grass blew back toward his legs. He was downwind. He slipped forward through the foliage. The ferns around him were huge and dense, but up ahead he could see sunlight shining through from a clearing beyond. The sound of purring was very loud now. There was another sound as well, an odd squeaking sound. It was high-pitched, and at first sounded almost mechanical, like a squeaking wheel. Thorne hesitated. Then, very slowly, he lowered a frond. And he stared. Nest. In the mid-morning light, 2 enormous tyrannosaurs, each 20 feet high, loomed above him. Their reddish skin had a leathery appearance. Their huge heads were fierce-looking, with heavy jaws and large, sharp teeth. But somehow, here the animals conveyed no sense of menace to Thorne. They moved slowly, almost gently, bending repeatedly over a large circular rampart of dried mud nearly 4 feet high. The two adults held bits of red flesh in their jaws as they ducked their heads below the mud wall. The movement was greeted by a frantic, high-pitched squeaking sound which stopped almost immediately. Then, when the adults lifted their heads again, the flesh was gone. There was no question. This was the nest. And Malcolm had been right. One tyrannosaur was noticeably larger than the other. In a few moments, the squeaking resumed. It sounded to Thorne like baby birds. The adults continued to duck their heads, feeding the unseen babies. A bit of torn flesh landed on the top of the mud mound. As he watched, Thorne saw an infant tyrannosaur rise into view above the rampart and start to scramble over the side. The infant was about the size of a turkey, with a large head and very large eyes. Its body was covered with a fluffy red down which gave it a scraggly appearance. A ring of pale white down circled its neck. The infant squeaked repeatedly, and it crawled awkwardly toward the meat, using its weak forearms. But when it finally reached the carrion, it jabbed, biting the flesh decisively with tiny, sharp teeth. It was busily eating the food when it screeched in alarm and started to slide down the outer wall of dried mud. Immediately, the mother tyrannosaur dropped her head and intercepted the baby's fall, then gently nudged the animal back inside the nest. Thorne was impressed by the delicacy of her movements, the attentive way she cared for her young. The father, meanwhile, continued to tear small pieces of meat. Both animals kept up a continuous purring growl, as if to reassure the infants. As Thorne watched, he shifted his position. His foot stepped on a branch. There was a sharp crack. Immediately, both adults jerked their heads up. Thorne froze. He held his breath. The tyrannosaurs scanned the area around the nest, looking intently in every direction. Their bodies were tense, their heads alert. Their eyes flicked back and forth, accompanied by little head jerks. After a moment they seemed to relax again. They bobbed their heads up and down and rubbed their snouts against each other. It seemed to be some kind of ritual movement, almost a dance. Only then did they resume feeding the infants. When they had calmed down, Thorne slipped away, moving quietly back to the motorcycle. Arby whispered over the headset, "Dr. Thorne, I can't see you." Thorne didn't answer. He tapped the microphone with his finger to signal that he had heard. Arby whispered, "I think I know where Dr. Levine is. He's off to your left." Thorne tapped the mic again and turned. To his left, among ferns, he saw a rusted bicycle. It said, "Property, InGen Corporation." It was leaning against a tree. Not bad, Arby thought, sitting in the trailer and watching the remote videos as he clicked on them. He now had the monitor divided into quarters. It was a good compromise between lots of views and images large enough to see. One of the views looked down from above on the two tyrannosaurs in the secluded clearing. It was mid-morning. The sun shone brightly on the muddy, trampled grass of the clearing. In the center he saw a round, steep-walled nest of mud. Inside the nest were 4 mottled white eggs, about the size of footballs. There were also some broken egg fragments and 2 baby tyrannosaurs looking exactly like featherless, squeaking birds. They sat in the nest with their heads turned up like baby birds, mouths gaping wide, waiting to be fed. Kelly watched the screen and said, "Look how cute they are." And then she added, "We should be out there." Arby didn't answer her. He was not at all sure he wanted to be any closer. The adults were being very cool about it, but Arby found the idea of these dinosaurs very unnerving in some deep way that he couldn't analyze. Arby had always found it reassuring to organize, to create order in his life. Even arranging the images neatly on the computer monitor was calming to him. But this island was a place where everything was unknown and unexpected, where you didn't know what would happen. He found that troubling. On the other hand, Kelly was excited. She kept making comments about the tyrannosaurs, how big they were, the size of their teeth. She seemed entirely enthusiastic, without any fear at all. Arby felt annoyed with her. "Anyway," she said, "what makes you think you know where Dr. Levine is?" Arby pointed to the image of the nest on the monitor. "Watch." "I see it." "No. Watch, Kel." As they stared at the screen, the image moved slightly. It panned to the left, then centered again. "See that?" Arby said. "So what? Maybe the wind is blowing the camera or something." Arby shook his head. "No, Kel, he's up in the tree. Levine's moving the camera." "Oh." A pause. She watched again. "You might be right." Arby grinned. That was about all he could expect to get from Kelly. "Yeah, I think so. But what's Dr. Levine doing in the tree? Maybe he's adjusting the camera." They listened to Thorne's breathing over the radio. Kelly stared at the 4 video images, each showing a different view of the island. She sighed. "I can't wait to get out there," she said. "Yeah, me too," Arby said, but he didn't mean it. He glanced out the window of the trailer and saw the explorer coming back with Eddie and Malcolm. Secretly, he was glad to see them return. Thorne stood at the base of the tree, looking up. He couldn't see Levine through the leaves, but he knew he must be somewhere up above, because he was making what seemed to Thorne like a lot of noise. Thorne glanced nervously back at the clearing, screened by intervening foliage. He could still hear the purring. It remained steady, uninterrupted. Thorne waited. What the hell was Levine doing up in a tree anyway? He heard rustling in the branches above, and then silence. A grunt, then more rustling. And then Levine said aloud, "Oh, shit!" Then a loud crashing sound, the crack of branches and a howl of pain, and then Levine crashed down on the ground in front of Thorne, landing hard on his back. He rolled over, clutching his shoulder. "Damn!" he said. Levine wore muddy khakis that were torn in several places. Behind a 3-day growth of beard, his face was haggard and spattered with mud. He looked up as Thorne moved toward him and grinned. "You're the last person I expected to see, Doc," Levine said, "but your timing is flawless." Thorne extended his hand, and Levine started to reach for it when, from the clearing behind them, the tyrannosaurs gave a deafening roar. "Oh, no," Kelly said. On the monitor, the tyrannosaurs were agitated, moving swiftly in circles, raising their heads and bellowing. "Dr. Thorne, what's happening?" Arby said. They heard Levine's voice, tinny and scratchy on the radio, but they couldn't make out the words. Eddie and Malcolm came into the trailer. Malcolm took one look at the monitor and said, "Tell them to get out of there right now." On the monitor, the 2 tyrannosaurs had turned their backs to each other, so they were facing outward in a posture of defense. The babies were protected in the center. The adults swung their heavy tails back and forth over the nest, above the babies' heads, but the tension was palpable. And then one of the adults bellowed and charged out of the clearing. "Dr. Thorne! Dr. Levine, get out of there!" Thorne swung his leg over the bike and gripped the rubber handles. Levine jumped on behind, clutched him around the waist. Thorne heard a chilling roar and looked back to see one of the tyrannosaurs crash through the foliage and charge them. The animal was running at full speed, head low, jaws open, in an unmistakable posture of attack. Thorne twisted the throttle. The electric motor whirred. The back wheel spun in the mud, not moving. "Go!" Levine shouted. "Go!" The tyrannosaur rushed toward them, roaring. Thorne could feel the ground shake. The roar was so loud it hurt his ears. The tyrannosaur was nearly on them, the big head lunging forward, jaws wide open. Thorne kicked back with his heels, pushing the bike forward. Suddenly the rear wheel caught, throwing up a plume of mud, and the bike roared up the muddy track. He accelerated fast. The motorcycle fished and swerved treacherously on the trail. Behind him, Levine was shouting something, but Thorne didn't listen. His heart was pounding. The bike jumped across a rut in the path, and they almost lost their balance, then regained it, accelerating again. Thorne did not dare look back. He could smell the odor of rotten flesh, could hear the rasping breath of the giant animal in pursuit. "Doc, take it easy," Levine shouted. Thorne ignored him. The bike roared up the hill. The foliage slapped at them. Mud spit up on their faces and chests. He was pulled over into a rut, then brought the bike back to the center of the trail. He heard another roar and imagined it was a bit fainter, but "Doc!" Levine shouted, leaning close to his ear. "What are you trying to do, kill us? Doc, we're alone!" Thorne came to a flat part of the path and risked a glance back over his shoulder. Levine was right. They were alone. He saw no sign of the pursuing tyrannosaur, though he still heard it roaring somewhere in the distance. He slowed the bike. "Take it easy," Levine said, shaking his head. His face was ashen, frightened. "You're a terrible driver, do you know that? You ought to take some lessons. You almost got us killed there." "He was attacking us," Thorne said angrily. He was familiar with Levine's critical manner, but right now— "That's absurd," Levine said. "He wasn't attacking at all." "It sure as hell looked like it," Thorne said. No, Levine said. "He wasn't attacking us. The Rex was defending his nest. There's a big difference." "I didn't see any difference," Thorne said. He pulled the bike to a stop and glared at Levine. "In point of fact," Levine said, "if the Rex had decided to chase you, we'd be dead right now. But he stopped almost immediately." "He did?" Thorne said. "There's no question about it," Levine said in his pedantic manner. "The Rex only intended to scare us off and defend his territory. He'd never leave the nest unguarded unless we took something or disrupted the nest. I'm sure he's back there with his mate right now, hovering over the eggs, not going anywhere." "Then I guess we're lucky he's a good parent," Thorne said, gunning the motor. "Of course he's a good parent," Levine continued. "Any fool could tell that. Didn't you see how thin he was? He's been neglecting his own nourishment to feed his offspring. Probably been doing it for weeks. A Tyrannosaurus rex is a complex animal with complex hunting behavior, and he has complex child-rearing behavior as well. I wouldn't be surprised if adult tyrannosaurs have an extended parenting role that lasts for months. He may teach his offspring to hunt, for example. Start by bringing in small, wounded animals and letting the youngsters finish them off, that kind of thing. It'll be interesting to find out exactly what he does. Why are we waiting here?" Through Thorne's earpiece, the radio crackled. Malcolm said, "It would never occur to him to thank you for saving his life." Thorne grunted. "Evidently not," he said. Levine said, "Who are you talking to? Is it Malcolm? Is he here?" "Yes," Thorne said. "He's agreeing with me, isn't he?" Levine said. "Not exactly," Thorne said, shaking his head. "Look, Doc," Levine said, "I'm sorry if you got upset, but there was no reason for it. The truth is, we were never in danger, except from your bad driving." "Fine. That's fine." Thorne's heart was still pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath, swung the bike to the left, and headed down a wider path back toward their camp. Sitting behind him, Levine said, "I'm very glad to see you, Doc. I really am." Thorne didn't answer. He followed the path downward, through foliage. They descended to the valley, picking up speed. Soon they saw the trailers in the clearing below. Levine said, "Good, you brought everything. And the equipment's working? Everything in good condition?" "It all seems to be fine." "Perfect," Levine said. "Then this is just perfect." "Maybe not," Thorne said. Through the back window of the trailer, Kelly and Arby were waving cheerfully through the glass. "You're kidding," Levine said. Fourth configuration. Approaching the chaotic edge, elements show internal conflict, an unstable and potentially lethal region. Ian Malcolm. Levine. They came running across the clearing, shouting, Dr. Levine, you're safe." They hugged Levine, who smiled despite himself.
He turned to Thorne. "Doc," Levine said, "this was very unwise." "Why don't you explain that to them?" Thorne said. "They're your students."
Kelly said, "Don't be mad, Dr. Levine. It was our decision," Arby explained to Levine. "We came on our own."
"On your own?" Levine said.
"We thought you'd need help," Arby said, "and you did."
He turned to Thorne. Thorne nodded. "Yes, they've helped us."
"And we promise we won't get in the way," Kelly said. "You go ahead and do whatever you have to do, and we will just—"
"The kids were worried about you," Malcolm said, coming up to Levine, "because they thought you were in trouble."
"Anyway, what's the big rush?" Eddie said. "I mean, you build all these vehicles and then you leave without them."
"I had no choice," Levine said. "The government has an outbreak of some new encephalitis on its hands. They've decided it's related to the occasional dinosaur carcass that washes up there. Of course, the whole idea is idiotic, but that won't stop them from destroying every animal on this island the minute they find out about it. I had to get here first. Time is short."
"So you came here alone," Malcolm said.
"Nonsense, Ian. Stop pouting. I was going to call you as soon as I verified this was the island. And I didn't come here alone. I had a guide named Diego, a local man who swore he had been on this island as a kid years before. And he seemed entirely knowledgeable. He led me up the cliff without any problem. And everything was going just fine until we were attacked at the stream, and Diego—"
"Attacked?" Malcolm said. "By what?"
"I didn't really see what it was," Levine said. "It happened extremely fast. The animal knocked me down and tore the backpack, and I don't really know what happened after that. Possibly the shape of my pack confused it because I got up and started running again, and it didn't chase me."
Malcolm was staring at him.
"You were damn lucky, Richard." "Yes, well, I ran for a long time. When I looked back, I was alone in the jungle and lost. I didn't know what to do, so I climbed a tree. That seemed like a good idea, and then, around nightfall, the velociraptors showed up."
"Velociraptors?"
Arby said. "Small carnivores," Levine said. "Basic theropod body shape, long snout, binocular vision, roughly 2 meters tall, weighing perhaps 90 kilos. Very fast, intelligent, nasty little dinosaurs, and they travel in packs. And last night there were 8 of them jumping all around my tree trying to get to me, all night long, jumping and snarling, jumping and snarling. I didn't get any sleep at all."
"Ah, that's a shame," Eddie said.
"Look," Levine said crossly, "it's not my problem if—"
Thorne said,
"You spent the night in the tree?" "Yes, and in the morning the raptors had gone, so I came down and started looking around. I found the lab, or whatever it is. Clearly they abandoned it in a hurry, leaving some animals behind. I went through the building and discovered that there is still power. Some systems are still going, all these years later. And most important, there is a network of security cameras. That's a very lucky break. So I decided to check on those cameras, and I was hard at work when you people barged in."
"Wait a minute," Eddie said. "We came here to rescue you."
"I don't know why," Levine said. "I certainly never asked you to."
Thorne said,
"It sounded like you did over the phone."
"That is a misunderstanding," Levine said. "I was momentarily upset because I couldn't work the phone. You've made that phone too complicated, Doc. That's the problem. So, shall we get started?"
Levine paused. He looked at the angry faces all around him. Malcolm turned to Thorne. "A great scientist," he said, "and a great human being." "Look," Levine said, "I don't know what your problem is. The expedition was going to come to this island sooner or later. In this instance, sooner is better. Everything has turned out quite well, and frankly, I don't see any reason to discuss it further. This is not the time for petty bickering. We have important things to do, and I think we should get started, because this island is an extraordinary opportunity, and it isn't going to last forever." Dodgson. Louis Dodgson sat hunched in a dark corner of the Chespirito Cantina in Puerto Cortes, nursing a beer. Beside him, George Basilton, the Regius Professor of Biology at Stanford, was enthusiastically devouring a plate of huevos rancheros. The egg yolks ran yellow across green salsa. It made Dodgson sick just to look at it. He turned away, but he could still hear Basilton licking his lips noisily. There was no one else in the bar except for some chickens clucking around the floor.
Every so often a young boy would come to the door, throw a handful of rocks at the chickens, and run away again, giggling. A scratchy stereo played an old Elvis Presley tape through corroded speakers above the bar. Dodgson hummed Falling in Love with You and tried to control his temper. He had been sitting in this dump for damn near an hour. Basilton finished his eggs and pushed the plate away. He brought out the small notebook he carried everywhere with him. "Now, Lou," he said, "I've been thinking about how to handle this." "Handle what?" Dodgson said irritably. "There's nothing to handle unless we can get to that island." While he spoke, he tapped a small photograph of Richard Levine on the edge of the bar table, turned it over, looked at the image upside down, then right side up. He sighed. He looked at his watch. "Lou," Basilton said patiently, "getting to the island is not the important part. The important part is how we present our discovery to the world." Dodgson paused. "Our discovery," he repeated. "I like that, George. That's very good. Our discovery." "Well, that's the truth, isn't it?" Basilton said, with a bland smile. "InGen is bankrupt, its technology lost to mankind. A tragic, tragic loss, as I have said many times on television, but under the circumstances, anyone who finds it again has made a discovery. I don't know what else you would call it. As Henri Poincaré put it, "Okay," Dodgson said, "so we make a discovery. And then what? Hold a press conference?" "Absolutely not," Basilton said, looking horrified. "A press conference would appear extremely crass. It would open us up to all sorts of criticism. No. A discovery of this magnitude must be treated with decorum. It must be reported, Lou." "Reported?" "In the literature. Nature, I imagine. Yes." Dodgson squinted. "You want to announce this in an academic publication?" "What better way to make it legitimate?" Basilton said. "It's entirely proper to present our findings to our scholarly peers. Of course it will start a debate, but what will that debate consist of? An academic squabble, professors sniping at professors, which will fill the science pages of the newspapers for 3 days until it is pushed aside by the latest news on breast implants. And in those 3 days we will have staked our claim." "You'll write it?" "Yes," Basilton said. "And later, I think, an article in American Scholar or perhaps Natural History. A human interest piece, what this discovery means for the future, what it tells us about the past, all that." Dodgson nodded. He could see that Basilton was correct, and he was reminded once again how much he needed him and how wise he had been to add him to the team. Dodgson never thought about public reaction, and Basilton thought about nothing else. "Well, that's fine," Dodgson said, "but none of it matters unless we get to that island." He glanced at his watch again. He heard a door open behind him, and Dodgson's assistant, Howard King, came in, pulling a heavy-set Costa Rican man with a mustache. The man had a weathered face and a sullen expression. Dodgson turned on his stool. "Is this the guy?" "Yes, Lou." "What's his name?" "Gandoka." "Senor Gandoka." Dodgson held up the photo of Levine. "You know this man?" Gandoka hardly glanced at the photo. He nodded. "Si, Senor Levine." "That's right. Senor fucking Levine. When was he here?" "A few days ago. He left with Dieguito, my cousin. They are not back yet." "And where did they go?" Dodgson asked. "Isla Sorna." "Good." Dodgson drained his beer, pushed the bottle away. "You have a boat?" He turned to King. "Does he have a boat?" King said, "He's a fisherman. He has a boat." Gandoka nodded. "A fishing boat, si." "Good. I want to go to Isla Sorna, too." "Si, senor, but today the weather—" "I don't care about the weather," Dodgson said. "The weather will get better. I want to go now." "Perhaps later." "Now." Gandoka spread his hands. "I am very sorry, senor," Dodgson said. "Show him the money, Howard." King opened a briefcase. It was filled with 5,000 Cologne notes. Gandoka looked, picked up one of the bills, inspected it. He put it back carefully, shifted on his feet a little. Dalchin said, "I want to go now." "Si, senor," Gandoka said. "We'll leave when you are ready." "That's more like it," Dalchin said. "How long to get to the island?" "Perhaps 2 hours, senor." "Fine," Dalchin said. "That'll be fine."